Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I moved into this old building about 2 months ago. The rent was low and I liked that it was in the center of town. I thought it would be convenient. I didn't pay much attention to the creaky floors or the dim lighting in the hallway at first. It seemed like a normal, slightly run-down place that might just need some care. But from the very first week, something felt off. I tried ignoring it. I tried telling myself it was just my nerves. But every night, around midnight or a bit later, I got this feeling that someone was in the hallway. It didn't start right away. The first week I was busy unpacking, setting up my furniture and starting a new job. I barely had time to notice anything weird, but the second week I started hearing those footsteps. I remember the first time it happened. It was around 12:30 in the morning. I was lying on my small couch, flipping through channels on the TV. I heard this slow, steady sound outside my door. It was faint, but it sounded like actual footsteps. There was a pause, then a creak, then another pause, then another creak. It reminded me of someone trying to walk without making noise, except the floor in this hallway is too old for that. The wood cracks under any amount of pressure. At first I figured it might be a neighbor who worked late or something like that. I got up, opened the door to see who it was, and found no one. The hallway lights were on, but the place was empty. I walked a few steps out. Nothing. I shrugged it off and closed the door. I told myself the floors might just be shifting or something. Old buildings make weird noises. I went back to the couch and tried to forget it, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The next night I heard the same thing, but this time it started after 1 a.m. Same pattern, slow, careful steps, as if someone was moving down the corridor. I went to the door, opened it faster this time, hoping to catch whoever it was. Again, nothing. No one in the hallway. I felt a chill run through me, but I wasn't about to panic. I've never believed in ghosts or anything like that. I chalked it up to old wood, or maybe someone on the floor above me. The sound can carry in older buildings, and it can play tricks on you. Still, it was odd. I almost didn't want to tell anyone about it because I knew how it would sound. Paranoid. By the third night I started getting annoyed. It had been happening consistently, always after midnight, but not exactly at the same time. Sometimes 12:15, sometimes 1 hour, sometimes later. I was losing sleep. I'd lie in bed, waiting. The hallway was pretty long and I lived near the far end, so whoever was walking or whatever was causing the noise was moving along the length of the corridor. I kept imagining a person pacing, looking for a door number or some random occupant stumbling around. But the building was never busy at that hour. I didn't hear any other noises except those slow steps and the occasional pop of the old floor. My heart would start pounding. I'd get up and press my ear against the door. The steps would continue, getting closer, and then stop near my apartment. There would be silence for a few seconds, and then they'd recede the same way they came. It felt like some weird game. But every time I opened the door, I saw no one. One night I decided I'd be a little more methodical about it. I shut off all the lights in my place, sat in the dark, and waited. I checked the time on my phone every now and then. It was around 12:40 when I heard it. The steps were softer at first, as if at the far end of the hallway, near the staircase that leads to the lobby. They got louder, or maybe just clearer as they approached. I placed my ear against the door. I could hear each creak, each shift in the old boards. My heart was beating so loud I almost couldn't hear what was happening. My palms were sweaty. I took slow breaths to calm down. Then the footsteps reached my door. They stopped. I felt this overwhelming tension in my chest, like I was holding my breath even though I was trying not to. For a split second, I didn't even blink. I expected a knock. Nothing came. I thought maybe I could see a shadow under the door, so I turned off the light in the small entryway behind me to see if there was any movement. But it was too dark in that hallway for me to see anything. The door has a tiny peephole though, so I moved my eye up to it. I looked out. The corridor light was on, but I didn't see anything. No figure, no shadow. It was just empty. Then, after maybe 5 or 10 seconds, I heard the steps again, going back the way they came. It was the exact reverse. A slow, steady sequence of soft creaks moving away from me back toward the staircase. I pressed my ear to the door again. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. I listened until the steps faded out. It was like they disappeared into the far end of the hallway. I stood there, feeling my heart pound. My throat was dry. I swallowed hard, opened the door a crack, and peered out. Empty hallway, lights buzzing faintly. No people, no movement. I stepped out for a second, listened. Nothing. The only thing I could hear was a faint hum from the elevator at the other end. After a minute, I gave up. I went back in, locked the door, and tried to sleep. I couldn't relax. Every little sound made me sit up. It was well past 2 a.m. when I finally drifted off, and the next morning I felt exhausted. The routine continued for a while. Some nights I'd go to bed early, hoping I'd sleep through whatever was happening. I'd wake up around midnight or 1 a.m. anyway, startled by a dream or some small noise. Then I'd wait, and sure enough, the footsteps would return. At times I considered the possibility that I was half asleep and imagining things, but it felt too real. I could feel the boards vibrating under someone's weight. I decided to ask around. The first person I talked to was the manager, an older guy named Richard. He had a small office down in the lobby. I casually mentioned that I heard noises at night. He shrugged and said, "It's an old place. The pipes bang, the wood expands, all that stuff." I nodded and said, maybe that was it. I also spoke briefly with a neighbor who lived at the other end of the hallway. He was a quiet, middle-aged guy with a slight limp. I asked if he ever heard anything weird at night. He shook his head and said he usually slept like a rock. He didn't seem suspicious or anything. I tried to bring it up with a few other residents I met in the elevator, but most of them just smiled politely and changed the subject. It felt silly to push the topic. One night, I thought about setting up some kind of recording device. I had an old phone that I didn't use anymore. I thought maybe I could leave it in the hallway on record and see what I caught, but I didn't want someone stepping on it or stealing it. I also worried I'd come off as some paranoid person if I got caught messing around in the corridor that late. I ended up not doing it, which I regret. Maybe I could have gotten proof of something. Instead, I kept relying on my own observations. The noises started to get more frequent. Where it used to be a few times a week, it now happened almost every night. Sometimes I even heard them around 2 or 3 in the morning. It was always the same pattern. Slow steps from the far end, a pause by my door, then a return trip. I never heard any doors opening or closing. It was weird. I wondered if it could be some neighbor who got locked out, or a person with insomnia pacing the hallway, but it never made sense that they'd stop right by my door, and I couldn't figure out why I never caught them in the act. I started to feel uneasy in my own home. I'd lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. My body would tense up at the slightest sound. During the day, I felt silly, but at night it was a different story. My pulse would race and I'd sweat a lot. My apartment wasn't hot, but my body acted like I was in a sauna. Some nights, I'd just watch TV until 2 a.m. with the volume low, waiting for the footsteps. They always came. One particular night was the worst. It was late, around 1:30 a.m., and I was leaning against the door again, trying to catch anything unusual. My ear was pressed against the wood. I heard the steps start up at the far end. They got louder and I felt my heart pounding. There was a faint squeak, then another, then another. Each one matched the shift in weight. It sounded like a person wearing shoes with a hard sole, taking gentle, deliberate steps. It wasn't random. They reached my door. I held my breath. For a split second, I thought I heard breathing on the other side, but I couldn't be sure. My body locked up. My fingers tingled. Then there was silence. After a moment, the footsteps started moving back. When they were gone, I realized I was shaking. I looked through the peephole. No one. That was the night I decided to sit down on the floor, right by the door. I just sat there back against the wood, trying to calm myself. I couldn't believe this was happening. My mind went through a list of explanations. Maybe some neighbor had a sleepwalking habit, or maybe the building's wooden floors were shifting due to heat pipes at odd hours. I tried to rationalize it, but it kept happening, and it was always the same route, always the same time frame, always stopping by my door. The manager kept telling me the same thing whenever I brought it up. Old floors, old pipes. He sounded bored with me. I think he found me annoying. I didn't get the feeling he was hiding anything, just that he thought it was a non-issue. My neighbor with the limp just said, never heard a thing, and changed the subject. A couple of times I thought I saw someone lingering in the stairwell when I left for work in the morning, but that turned out to be another tenant waiting for a ride. I never pinned down anyone suspicious. It was frustrating. As the weeks went by, I became so jumpy that every noise made me tense up. If my fridge made a clicking sound, I'd freeze. If a car honked outside, I'd flinch. My body felt like it was on constant alert. I was getting dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep. People at work asked if I was okay. I said I was just busy. I didn't want to come across as unhinged. Then one weekend, I thought maybe I could catch whoever it was by surprise if I stayed out in the hallway. So around midnight, I turned off the lights in my apartment, opened my door very quietly, and stepped into the corridor. I left my door unlocked behind me. The hallway lights were on, but they were dim and flickered sometimes. I walked to the far end where the stairs were. Nobody was there. I crouched down next to the wall, trying to stay still. The building was quiet. I heard the elevator run a couple of times, but no one got off on my floor. After about an hour, I couldn't stand it anymore. My legs were cramping and I felt ridiculous. I went back inside. Of course, that was the one night the footsteps didn't happen. I guess if it was a person, they noticed me somehow, or it was all just random timing. I didn't try that again. Eventually, I got to a point where I tried to ignore it. If I heard the steps, I'd stay in bed and let them pass. But ignoring it didn't help. It actually made me more anxious. I kept imagining someone standing on the other side of my door staring. The thought of it sent a chill through me. I'd start shaking under the covers. Sometimes I'd get up and double-check the lock. I never slept well. One night, it was around 12:50 a.m., I heard the footsteps begin. I forced myself to stay in bed. They moved slowly along the corridor, just like always. I was sweating so much I had to push the blankets off. My heart was racing. When the steps reached my door, they stopped. I could almost feel someone's presence through the door, like if I opened it, they'd be right there. I listened, barely breathing. My mouth was dry. A few seconds later, the footsteps moved away. I heard them fade. The hallway went quiet. I didn't get up to check. I just lay there until morning, dozing on and off in a restless haze. And that's how it went for a while. The footsteps never led to anything else. They never tried to open my door. They never knocked. They never whispered or rattled anything. I just heard them come and go. Nobody else seemed to notice or care. I couldn't figure out a rational explanation, but I also couldn't prove anything spooky was going on. I started to wonder if some eccentric neighbor had a reason to pace at those hours. Maybe it was an older person with insomnia, trying to stay mobile. Maybe it was the building's heating system causing the wood to snap in a sequence that sounded like footsteps. Maybe it was a person who got a kick out of creeping around at night. I still live here. I keep telling myself it's nothing. But every time I hear that sound, I tense up. It's as if I'm waiting for something bad to happen, even though nothing ever does. It's just footsteps, coming and going, night after night, stopping by my door. It's been a few weeks since the last time, but I don't feel relief. I feel like it's only a matter of time before it starts up again. I never found any clues in the hallway. I checked for scuff marks or footprints on the worn tiles. Nothing unusual. I knocked on a few neighbors' doors in the past just to ask if they ever heard anything. Nobody admitted to it. I tried telling myself maybe I'm the only one bothered by these sounds because my apartment is near the end of the hall. Maybe the acoustics are weird there. All I know is it's real enough to make my heart race when I hear it. I don't have a solid explanation. It could be a neighbor, it could be the floor, it could be a combination of things. I don't have proof that anything supernatural is going on. Actually, I doubt that's the case at all. I'm convinced it's something or someone completely normal, just acting in a strange way. But that doesn't stop me from feeling uneasy. That long corridor, those dim lights, and that sequence of footsteps in the dead of night. It's hard not to get freaked out. When I talk about it, people usually shrug it off. But if they experienced it themselves, maybe they'd get it. I've thought about moving out, but financially this place still makes sense for me. The rent is cheap and it's close to work. Plus, I keep thinking if I do leave, I'll always wonder what the hell was really happening in that hallway. For now, I deal with it. I keep my door locked. I try to drown out the noise with a fan or some music when I'm lying in bed. Sometimes I wear earplugs. But on quiet nights, I can still hear those steps. There's nothing dramatic about it. It's just footsteps in an old building coming and going without explanation, and honestly, that alone is enough to get under my skin. That's the entire story. I wish I had a big reveal, some proof that it was a prank or that there's a hidden passage in the walls, but I don't. All I have is the memory of sitting there, pressed against my door, hearing those slow, deliberate steps on the other side, just inches away with no clue who or what they belong to. And that's it. It happened. I heard it. I felt it. And I never figured it out. I'm not saying it's supernatural. But late at night, when my mind is racing, I can't help but imagine someone standing there in the darkness of that old hallway, listening to me breathe on the other side of the door, only to slip away when I look. It still makes my heart pound just thinking about it. I still remember that last night at the hotel. My body was exhausted and my mind was half shut off, but I couldn't settle into real sleep. The room was too quiet. The bed felt too stiff. The air conditioner rattled a bit, and every time it kicked in I would jerk awake, feeling like something was off. I had been in that small city for a few days on some work-related stuff, and the place was nothing fancy, just a decent hotel on a busy street. People came and went at all hours, but it was still quieter than I was used to. Around midnight, I decided to force myself to sleep. I set my phone to vibrate, plugged it in by the nightstand, and rolled over, hoping to get enough rest before the morning checkout. I had no idea how the night would turn out. I dozed off at some point, but it wasn't restful. I kept looking at the clock on the bedside table, 1 in the morning, then 2 in the morning. Every tiny noise felt louder in that unfamiliar room. I'd hear an elevator ding down the hallway, or someone's muffled cough in another room, and my brain refused to relax. At around 3 in the morning, I was in that weird half-asleep state where you're aware of the darkness but not fully conscious of your thoughts. That's when my cell phone started buzzing. It wasn't just one buzz. It was the full vibration pattern of an incoming call. I forced my eyes open and reached over. The screen lit up the entire room. It felt blinding. The number wasn't in my contacts. Part of me thought it might be a family member or a friend calling in an emergency, because who else would call at 3 in the morning? My pulse quickened, but something about it felt off, so I let it go. I didn't answer. I waited for it to stop. Eventually, the buzzing ended. I placed my phone face down on the nightstand, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe slowly. My heart was pounding, probably more from surprise than anything else. I told myself it was a wrong number, maybe a drunk dial or someone with a different time zone. I adjusted the blanket around me, hoping it wouldn't ring again, but it did. Not immediately, though. About 2 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. I wanted to ignore it, but it felt like the kind of call that wouldn't just vanish if I pretended not to hear it. Adrenaline was creeping into my system. I sat up, pressing the answer button before my mind could talk me out of it. I didn't say anything at first, but I heard low breathing on the other end. That was my first real jolt of fear. It wasn't heavy breathing like in a horror movie, but it was clear that someone was there. I still didn't speak. Eventually, I just said, "Hello?" It sounded shaky to my own ears. The breathing continued for a moment. Then the call disconnected. That was it. No words, just the sound of someone on the line and then a click. I felt a chill spread through my body. I've gotten plenty of wrong number calls in my life, but usually the caller says something like, "Sorry, wrong number," before hanging up. This was different. I wasn't sure why, but it made me uneasy. I placed the phone down again, this time turning the screen so I could see if it lit up again. My eyes drifted to the clock. 3:05 a.m. Great, I thought. This is exactly what I need when I have a checkout in a few hours. I tried to breathe slowly and reason it out. Maybe it was some random creep calling numbers in the middle of the night. Maybe they were bored. But then my phone buzzed again. Same number. This time I clicked the answer button right away. I said, "Who is this?" I could hear something in the background, maybe the faint hum of a television or static. Then a voice whispered my name, clear as day, and hung up. I felt my skin crawl. Hearing my name in that whispery voice felt invasive, like a personal violation. This person knew exactly who I was. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I turned my phone off without a second thought. I didn't want to risk it. If they had my number, they could text me or call me whenever. But I had no idea how they got it in the first place. I sat there for a few minutes, in the dark, listening to my own breathing. My palms were sweaty, and my stomach felt tight. My mind raced with questions. Who would do something like this? Why would they do it? And how did they know my name? I got up, walked to the small bathroom, and splashed water on my face. The sink was cramped, and there was a cheap fluorescent light overhead that hummed. I stared at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot. I looked tense. I tried to calm myself down. I dried my face with a rough hotel towel, and then turned the bathroom light off. The darkness in the main room felt heavier than before. I stepped back toward the bed, checking the lock on the door as I passed. It was secure. I had the standard chain lock on, too. The flimsy kind you usually see in hotel rooms. No strange noises from the hallway. No footsteps, no muffled voices. For a second, I considered going down to the front desk to complain. But what would I say? That someone called me 3 times, that they whispered my name, and that I was scared. The receptionist would probably shrug, say there's nothing they could do about random calls to my cell phone. I sat on the edge of the bed, raking my fingers through my hair, trying to figure out if I was overreacting. That's when the room phone started ringing. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. The loud ring cut through the silence like a blaring alarm. I felt an instant sense of dread. I hoped it was just the receptionist calling about some standard issue, like a credit card hold or a reminder for checkout times. That would have been an ordinary explanation. But at 3 a.m, that seemed unlikely. Still, I told myself it had to be the front desk. I picked up the receiver and cleared my throat. "Hello?" My voice shook. There was a pause just long enough to make me uneasy. Then a man's voice, soft but distinct, said, "You still awake?" He knew. He knew I was in that room, awake, alert, and freaked out. The hair on my arms stood up. My grip tightened on the receiver. I didn't say a word. I slammed the phone down, my heart thumping. My entire body felt hot, and I could barely think straight. Whoever this was, they had not only my cell phone number, but also the room's extension. And they knew my name. That wasn't random. That wasn't a coincidence. I sprang off the bed and double-checked the door. Still locked. I peered through the peephole. The hallway was dim, lit by those standard, dull hotel lights. I couldn't see anyone. Everything was still. I pressed my ear to the door for a moment, but I heard nothing except the distant hum of the elevator. I yanked open the door and looked up and down the corridor. It was empty. The carpets were a dark red color. No one was in sight. The hallway lights flickered a bit. I felt a breeze from somewhere. Maybe the air conditioning system. I waited a few seconds, scanning every corner, expecting someone to jump out or dart around the corner. Nothing. I closed the door, locked it again, and then shoved a chair from the little desk under the doorknob. It felt a bit silly, but I wanted an extra layer of security. Then I went straight to the phone on the bedside table and dialed the front desk. A woman answered with a polite voice, like she'd just woken up from a nap. I told her my name, my room number, and that I was getting strange calls. She paused, sounded confused, and said, "We haven't put any calls through to your room. No internal calls have come from our system, sir." That's all she told me. Her tone was calm and a bit dismissive, like she was used to people calling at odd hours with weird complaints. I asked her if anyone might be messing around with the phone lines. She said no. I asked her to check if maybe a guest asked for me by name. She said no one had approached the desk about me. She offered to call security, but I guess I hesitated because I wasn't sure if that would make things worse, or if there was even anything they could do. She said to let her know if it happened again, but otherwise she recommended I keep my door locked and let her know in the morning if there was a bigger issue. I hung up, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. It was 3:20 a.m. by then. I turned on the small lamp on the table near the TV, bathing the room in a dim yellowish glow. I kept all the other lights off so I could see the peephole more clearly if anyone walked by. The dark corners of the room made me uneasy, but I forced myself to look around thoroughly. I checked under the bed, opened the closet, pulled back the shower curtain. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing weird. I sat in the chair at the little desk, eyes glued to the door. My phone was off, which gave me a tiny bit of relief, but also a sense of isolation. If something went really wrong, I'd need to turn it back on or use the room phone. The minutes crept by. My entire body felt tense. My muscles were tight. My skin was damp with sweat. I kept wiping my palms on my pajama pants. Every time the air conditioner cycled off, I felt like I could hear footsteps in the hallway. Then it would cycle on, and the hum would cover everything again. I tried to think of who would have my number and know which room I was staying in. Could it be someone from work trying to play a messed up joke? That didn't make sense. They wouldn't do something like that at 3 a.m. And how would they get the room phone number? Also, that whispering of my name felt personal. It didn't sound like any of my coworkers. I ran through possibilities in my head, but nothing felt right. Eventually, I decided to at least try to sleep a bit, although I knew that was wishful thinking. I moved the chair away from the door, double-checked the locks, and got back in bed. I left the lamp on. I stayed on top of the covers, thinking that if I needed to bolt for the door, I wouldn't get tangled up. My heart rate finally started to slow down a little. I kept glancing at the silent phone, half expecting it to ring again. If it did, I had no plan, other than answering and telling the creep to leave me alone. But the phone didn't ring again. The next few hours passed in a weird state of half-sleep. My body felt drained, but my mind wouldn't shut up. The image of the phone lighting up in the dark kept repeating in my thoughts. The whisper, "You still awake?" wouldn't leave me. I felt so on edge that the slightest creak made me jump. I remember the weird pattern of the air conditioner turning on and off about 3 more times before I noticed the first signs of dawn peeking through the heavy curtains. By 6 in the morning, I'd had enough. I flicked on the overhead light, pulled my clothes out of the suitcase, and got dressed. My hands felt shaky. I stuffed my belongings into my bag without bothering to fold them. My mind was set on leaving that place as soon as I could. I didn't care about missing the free breakfast or staying until checkout. I just wanted to go. I remember I could barely focus on simple tasks like zipping up my bag. I kept looking around, expecting another call. Finally, I stepped out into the hallway. The lights felt brighter than they had during the night. A cleaning cart was parked near one of the rooms at the far end. A housekeeper in a uniform was moving slowly from door to door. She barely glanced at me. I got in the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and just stared at the closed doors until they slid open again. At the front desk, I told the same woman from the night before that I wanted to check out. I wasn't angry with her. I just wanted to leave. She tapped a few keys on her computer. She asked if everything was okay. I said no. I got some really disturbing calls. She nodded slowly, but didn't push for more details. She said she was sorry I had a bad experience. She handed me my receipt, and that was it. No one else seemed to care much. Walking out of those sliding glass doors and feeling the morning air hit my face was a relief. I tossed my bag into my car, got in, and locked the doors. I just sat there for a few seconds, breathing. My mind was flooded with everything that happened during the night. My phone was still off. I turned it on, half expecting to see a barrage of texts or missed calls from that unknown number. But there was nothing. It was like it never happened. All the way home, I kept replaying the whispers and the ringing phone. It still hits me even now, especially that moment when I heard my name. This wasn't a ghost story. I know that. There were no shadows drifting across the room, no unexplained movements, no supernatural nonsense. It was just someone who got my name, my cell phone number, and the room extension at the hotel. That's what made it so disturbing. Someone deliberately invaded my privacy in a place where I was supposed to feel safe for the night. I never found out who it was. I tried asking around a bit later, asking people at work if they had made any calls or if they knew someone in that city. Nobody admitted anything. I never got another call like that. It was a one-time thing. But it bothered me for a long time. It still bothers me. It felt personal in a way that random pranks don't. Maybe the person was just bored or thought it'd be funny. Maybe they had access to the hotel's reservation system. I don't know. I do know that ever since that night, I take extra care with my personal information when I travel. I don't tell people where I'm staying. I try to use a different name at check-ins whenever possible. Or at least I'm cautious about who knows my room number, and I almost never pick up unknown calls in the middle of the night. The memory is too raw. Sometimes a simple ring can bring back the feeling of that dark hotel room at 3 in the morning, and the voice on the other end whispering my name. In the grand scheme of things, nothing huge happened. I wasn't harmed. I left on my own terms, checked out, and went home. But that night reminded me that real fear doesn't always come from dramatic events. Sometimes it's just a phone call, at the wrong time with the wrong words, and the realization that someone out there knows exactly where you are when you thought you were alone. That's enough to shake you up, even if nobody dies, even if there's no direct threat. I never went back to that particular hotel. I avoided that city for a while, but eventually, life moved on. Still, whenever I think about that voice whispering my name in the dark, I feel a twist in my gut. It was so simple, so direct, and it felt like the start of something worse. I'm just glad it ended there, and that I was able to leave without further incidents. I guess that's all there is to say. It was the most unsettling night I've ever spent in a hotel, and I hope I never go through something like that again. I felt a chill run down my arms the moment I stepped off the bus. My watch showed it was past midnight and I was back from a party in another city. The terminal was almost empty. A single street lamp lit the sidewalk. The light flickered every few seconds, giving everything a dull glow. I noticed 2 other people around. One was leaning against a concrete column, hands in his jacket pockets, looking half asleep. The other was a man sitting at the far end of a wooden bench. He had his head down and his phone in his hand. I remember thinking how tired everyone looked. I felt drained too, but a bit restless. The party had been loud, and I'd drunk some soda that left me jittery. I walked slowly toward a metal bench under a dusty billboard. My bag felt heavy on my shoulder. I could still hear the soft hum of the bus engine behind me as it pulled away. When it was gone, the terminal fell into near silence. The wind made a soft whistling sound through the open space. The man at the end of the bench didn't move. The other person, the one by the column, let out a yawn and walked off toward the restrooms. I checked the schedule on my phone. There were no more buses running. I needed to figure out where the exit was or maybe call a rideshare. but the app told me no drivers were available in the area. I thought about asking the man on the bench if he knew of another late-night bus or a taxi stand nearby, but he looked withdrawn. I was also a bit shy to approach a stranger that late. My phone buzzed. I assumed it was a friend asking if I'd made it home. It wasn't. The message read in Portuguese, "Boa noite, está frio, né?" I paused. I looked at the number, but it was just a random sequence. It didn't match any contact in my phone. I glanced around. The bench was long enough to seat about 4 people, but I made sure to leave some space between me and this guy. He was still hunched forward, his jacket hood covering most of his head. His phone screen glowed in his hand. I stared at my phone. The message felt weird. "Good evening, it's cold, right?" I typed back in Portuguese. "Quem é você?" I kept it short. I waited. The wind kept blowing. My hoodie wasn't enough for that sudden drop in temperature, so I zipped it all the way up and put my hands in the pockets. My breath came out in faint puffs of vapor. I realized I was alone now, because I couldn't see the other person anymore. Maybe they got a ride or walked off. About 10 seconds later, I heard a soft chime from the man's phone. I tilted my head slightly. He lifted his phone, tapped the screen, then slipped it back into his pocket. My own phone vibrated in my hand. I read it quickly. "Better you take care around here. Night is long." This time it was in English. My pulse picked up. I looked over at the man. He got up without a word. He seemed taller than I first realized. He moved like he had a purpose. I watched him walk straight out of the terminal, past the rows of empty benches. His footsteps echoed. He never looked back. He didn't board any bus, and he didn't ask anyone for directions. I felt a knot in my stomach. I tapped the screen to call the number. No answer. It rang a few times, then went to voicemail, but there was no greeting. My mouth felt dry, so I swallowed hard. I sent another text. "Who are you? Why are you texting me?" I waited, but there was nothing else. I stood there, my eyes darting around the terminal. The overhead fluorescent lights were buzzing. The other guy, the one who'd been resting earlier, was gone. The bus schedule on a nearby sign indicated the terminal would stay open, but there wouldn't be another bus for hours. My plan was to take a taxi, but I didn't see any nearby. The usual taxi line was empty. The stand's small window was closed, and the lights inside that office were off. I felt unsettled. My heart was beating faster than normal. I shifted my weight from foot to foot, checked my phone again. No more texts. I told myself maybe it was just someone messing around. But how did they get my number? I looked toward the exit where that man left. The streets outside were dimly lit. I could see a few cars passing by. The city felt quiet. I wiped my palms on my jeans, took a deep breath, and told myself to keep calm. I decided to walk out of the terminal. My plan was to find a better lit area and maybe catch a cab. The sidewalk outside felt cold and damp under my sneakers. The wind was stronger out there. The street was wide, with a few stores closed behind steel shutters. I saw a small diner across the avenue. It had a neon sign that blinked, "Open." The place looked worn down, but it was the only open business I could see, so I headed toward it. My phone buzzed again. I froze, right there in the middle of the crosswalk. I checked it. No new messages. Turned out it was just a social media notification. Still, my heart jumped. I hurried inside the diner. A small bell jingled when I opened the door. The smell of coffee and fried food hit me. There were 2 customers seated at separate booths, both minding their own business. A bored-looking waitress stood behind the counter. She gave me a slight nod, so I walked to a booth near the window and set my bag down. The waitress came over and asked if I wanted anything. I ordered a coffee, black, no sugar. I couldn't decide if I was hungry, but I ended up asking for fries. My stomach was tied in knots, but I thought maybe something salty would help me relax. I took my phone out again. I stared at the unknown number. I tapped to call it once more. No answer. I tried to block the number, but part of me wanted to see if this person would send something else, so I didn't block it. I just sat there letting the phone rest in my hand. The The waitress brought my coffee. It was steaming hot and smelled strong. I took a sip and felt some warmth in my chest. The fries arrived soon after, looking a bit greasy. I ate a few, but I couldn't stop glancing at the phone. My mind raced with questions. Did that man overhear me talking on the phone earlier? Did I mention my number out loud at some point? Did he see me type it somewhere? I looked around the diner. The place had old posters and a TV mounted in the corner. It was showing some late-night talk show. The volume was low. The other customers seemed tired, probably locals or truck drivers passing through. None of them looked like that man from the bench. I wondered if he was out there somewhere, on the sidewalk, or if he'd gotten into a car. About 30 minutes went by, maybe more. My phone stayed silent. I felt a bit calmer. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and asked the waitress if she knew of any taxi companies around. She gave me a card for a local service. I dialed the number and asked for a ride. They said it would be about a 15-minute wait. I stepped outside to wait for the cab. The street felt a bit darker than before. Some of the lights seemed weaker, or maybe I was imagining things. My phone battery was at 20%. I kept glancing at the unknown number, thinking maybe I'd missed something. Nothing. Then a faint beep. It was just another social media ping. I turned notifications off for everything except calls and texts. My ears were on alert for any sound behind me, any footsteps. But all I heard was the hum of a nearby street lamp and the faint noise of a car engine a few blocks away. When the taxi arrived, I got in the back seat. The driver was a middle-aged guy who seemed friendly enough. I gave him the address of my apartment. He nodded and started driving. The car's interior smelled like stale cigarettes. The radio was turned low, playing some local station. I tried to relax against the seat. My phone was in my lap. A part of me expected it to ring. The driver broke the silence. He asked if I was coming from the bus terminal. I said yes, and I mentioned how it was pretty empty at that time of night. He nodded, said it gets sketchy around there sometimes, especially on weekends. I asked him if he'd heard about anyone messing with people's phones or something similar. He gave me a confused look in the rearview mirror and said he hadn't, but there's always some strange characters hanging around. My building was about 15 minutes away. The driver pulled up to the front gate and I paid. The street was quiet, with only a few windows lit in the surrounding apartments. The security light above my building's entrance flickered a bit. I stepped out of the car, grabbed my bag, and thanked the driver. He drove off, leaving me alone on the sidewalk. I felt a slight shiver. The wind had died down, but the air was still cold. I approached the gate and punched in my code. The lock clicked open. I made my way through the small courtyard, up the stairs, and to my unit on the second floor. The hallway smelled like old paint and cleaning products. I slid my key into the door, walked in, and locked it behind me. Inside, I flipped on the kitchen light and dropped my bag on a chair. My apartment was small but familiar. I kicked off my shoes and checked my phone again. Nothing. I let out a long breath. My heart rate finally slowed. I plugged my phone into the charger on the counter and gulped down a glass of water. Then I opened the fridge and drank a bit of orange juice straight from the carton. I felt tired, but I was wide awake at the same time. I looked at my phone on the counter. The screen lit up with the charging symbol. I hovered my finger over the unknown number, unsure if I should delete it. Instead, I decided to keep it there as evidence if I needed it. I thought about calling the cops, but I had no real proof of any wrongdoing. All I got were a couple of strange texts. No actual threats except a vague warning to take care. That's not exactly a crime. I went to my bedroom. I could hear the old pipes in the walls. They creaked now and then. I tossed my clothes into a hamper, then put on some sweatpants and a t-shirt. I turned off the main light and let the bedside lamp stay on. I climbed into bed, phone in hand. Part of me expected it to vibrate at any second, but it stayed silent. I opened a chat with my best friend, typed a message about what happened, and then erased it before sending. It felt silly to bother anyone at that hour with a vague story. I checked the time, 1:45 a.m. My eyes burned from exhaustion. I set an alarm for the next morning and tried to settle in. My mind kept replaying the moment when I noticed that guy with his phone. The way he lifted it, read something, then walked off. The text about the night being long echoed in my head. Eventually, I dozed off. I had restless dreams. Every time I woke up during the night, I checked my phone. No new messages. Around dawn, I finally got a few hours of real sleep. When I woke up, the sun was shining through my blinds. The phone was still next to me, silent. I got up and took a shower, hoping the hot water would clear my head. In the daylight, things felt less tense. I still felt uneasy, though. I tried to reason it all out. Maybe that guy saw my phone number on a slip of paper or overheard me telling it to a friend at the party. Or maybe he was bored and decided to spook somebody. But it was strange that he used both Portuguese and English. It stuck with me. I checked my phone's call history. The unknown number didn't show any additional attempts. No texts. I dialed the number once more just to see if anything changed. Voicemail again. No greeting. I hung up. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes open for any weird activity on my phone. Nothing happened. It was like that text conversation never existed. I tried a reverse lookup on the number. Nothing turned up. My phone company said it was a prepaid line, untraceable. I told a couple of my friends about it. They said it was probably just some random creep. They joked that I should ignore it. Still, I felt violated. Someone had my number and decided to send me cryptic messages at a time when I was alone in a deserted terminal. I thought about installing new security apps, changing my number, or being more careful about who I share it with. But part of me just shrugged it off as a weird late-night encounter. I never found out who sent those texts. I never saw that man again. I still think about it sometimes, especially if I'm out late at night waiting for a bus or walking through a quiet area. I glance around and wonder if someone is watching me from the corner, noticing my phone. I learned to keep my phone closer, keep my details private, and not trust the silence around me. Nothing actually happened to me that night. I made it home safe, but that feeling of exposure stayed with me. It was the way he just got up and left without taking a bus right after sending that message. It was the way he warned me to take care. The night felt longer than usual, even though it ended like any other. In the end, it taught me something about how easy it is for someone to get personal information. It could be as simple as looking over your shoulder or catching your number on your screen. The whole thing was unsettling. But life went on. I still go to parties, still ride the bus, still check my phone at terminals. I just do it with a bit more caution. I make sure no one's peering over my shoulder, and I don't flash my phone in crowded places. I don't dwell on it too much anymore. But I remember how my pulse raced when I read those texts. I remember the cold sweat under my hoodie. I remember my throat drying up as I sat there, realizing a stranger had access to my phone number. It may not seem dramatic, but in that moment my senses were on high alert. That was enough to leave an impression on me. So that's the story. It's not supernatural. It's not full of dramatic events, but it felt real and scary enough at the time. And to this day, I still wonder how he got my number. I never figured it out. I'll never forget the night I left work later than usual and drove down that empty state road. It was a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because it was the same day I had to finish a sudden project at the office. I ended up staying 2 hours beyond my normal shift. I felt exhausted when I finally packed up my laptop and paperwork. My only thought was getting home to eat something quick and fall into bed. I walked out of the building and noticed the parking lot was nearly empty. Only a couple of cars remained under the streetlights. My car was one of them. I got behind the wheel and started the engine. The radio crackled, playing some late-night talk show. I didn't care about the topic, so I turned it off. I wanted quiet. The road that led from my office connected to a state highway. Normally, I'd see a fair number of cars, but it was close to 10 at night. By that time, most people are already home, especially on a weekday. I checked my phone. No texts, no missed calls. I put it aside and concentrated on driving. My headlights lit up the 2-lane road, but everything else looked dark. No streetlights, just patches of farmland on both sides, and occasional trees or fences. The sky was clear, though. I saw stars overhead, bright and spread out across the darkness. I felt a bit on edge, probably just tired. My neck was stiff, and my eyes felt heavy. I tried to stay alert by focusing on the lines on the asphalt. I passed a few mile markers and noticed I hadn't seen any other cars for at least 10 minutes. My mind started wandering. I kept thinking about the day at work, the frustration of dealing with a last-minute project, and how I hated staying late without warning. I shook off that thought and told myself to focus on the drive. The road was long and mostly straight, with small curves here and there. After a while, I spotted something on the right side of the road. At first, it looked like a silhouette. I assumed it was a road sign or maybe a mailbox. As I got closer, I realized it was a person. The figure stood near the edge, close to where the shoulder met a patch of dirt. The shape moved a hand up and down, almost like a weak wave. It looked like someone trying to signal for help or hitch a ride. My gut reaction was to slow down. I wasn't used to seeing pedestrians out there, especially that late. In my head, I wondered why someone would be walking on that stretch of highway at 10 at night. When my headlights fell on him, I saw he wore simple clothes, a button-down shirt, plain pants, and old sneakers. Nothing fancy. His hair was short and messy. His face looked pale. There was something off about his expression. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was just blank. He lifted his hand again as if asking me to stop. I eased off the gas, checking my mirrors to make sure no car was behind me. But I didn't see anyone else. The road was still empty. I got close enough that I saw his eyes, though not with perfect detail. They looked dark and he wasn't really blinking. He stared at me as my car moved past. For a split second, I felt this jolt of tension in my chest. I didn't know why. I've given rides to strangers before, but usually in daytime and usually near gas stations or areas where help is easily accessible. This was different. It was late, isolated, and I was exhausted. I thought about pulling over a few yards ahead to see if he needed assistance. Maybe he was stranded or his car broke down somewhere. But as soon as that idea entered my head, something else told me it wasn't smart. The moment felt too strange. The road was dark and I didn't see any disabled vehicle around. I decided not to stop. I told myself I'd call highway patrol if I felt something was really wrong. But I kept driving for a few more seconds, then glanced in my rearview mirror. No one was there. The entire shoulder behind me looked empty. I squinted, thinking maybe he sat down, or maybe he walked back into the trees. It struck me as odd that a man on foot would disappear that fast. I didn't see any movement. I shrugged it off, but my heart was pounding. My hands felt sweaty on the steering wheel. I turned on the air conditioner to cool down. As I continued, my mind raced with explanations. Maybe he hid because he felt embarrassed that I didn't stop. Maybe he decided to head back into some nearby property. Or maybe I'd imagined him, but I knew I'd seen someone. My headlights clearly showed a man standing on the side of the road. I remembered the way his hand moved, the way his eyes looked. There was no chance I made that up. The drive home afterward was tense. I kept checking my mirrors every few seconds, worried he might appear again or that I'd see another person standing there. But the road remained empty the rest of the trip. I got home around 11. I parked in my usual spot, locked the doors, and hurried inside. I didn't feel like cooking, so I grabbed a bag of chips and drank some water. My mind stayed on that stranger. I thought about calling local authorities, but I felt foolish doing that when there was no actual emergency. I sat on my couch, stared at the dark TV screen, and tried to process it. My chest still felt a little tight, and my back was sweaty. I turned on a small lamp and tried to calm down. Eventually, I forced myself to go to bed. I didn't sleep well. I'd drift off and then jolt awake, thinking about that face I saw. The next morning at work, I felt groggy. My coworker Sam noticed. He lives out near that state road, though he takes another route. We had a short conversation in the break room while I sipped coffee. I told him I'd seen a strange guy on the side of the highway. I described the man's clothes and blank stare. Sam raised an eyebrow and said he'd heard rumors from other locals. People claimed a mysterious man sometimes appears along that stretch of road. Drivers slow down, think about stopping, and then, in the blink of an eye, he's gone. Nobody knows what his story is. Sam said the stories have been around for a while, but there's no official explanation. I got chills when Sam told me that. My stomach felt hollow. I realized I wasn't the only one who'd seen this. I asked Sam if he thought it was a prank or some local messing with travelers. He just shrugged and said nobody ever got a clear answer. Some folks assume it's a regular person who likes to wander at night and hide whenever cars pass. Others think it's something else. I wasn't sure what to believe. I just knew it freaked me out. I didn't want to drive back there alone so late again. But I had to, because my job requires me to stay late sometimes. That same day, I tried to brush it off and get on with my work. Part of me wanted to prove I wasn't rattled. But every time I thought about driving home after dark, I felt a knot in my stomach. My hands would get clammy, and I'd tense my jaw. I told myself it was probably just a normal guy who ducked into the trees. There are homeless individuals in the area, or maybe drifters who pass through. It's not impossible. But something about his face, that vacant look, bothered me. I couldn't forget it. Later that week, I ended up working late again. I braced myself for the drive home, telling myself to relax. I ate a small meal before leaving the office, hoping I wouldn't feel so frazzled. I pulled out of the parking lot around the same time, close to 10 at night. The road was dark, but I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of pedestrians. My shoulders felt tight, and I gripped the steering wheel harder than usual. The hum of my tires against the pavement filled the car, and the outside world was pitch black. I passed the spot where I'd seen him, glancing at the shoulder carefully. There was nothing there. I exhaled in relief. Still, every little shadow or shape made me sit up in my seat. I spotted a billboard in the distance. For a second, it looked like a figure, and my heart skipped a beat. Then I realized it was just a large advertisement. I felt foolish for getting so jumpy. I reached over to turn on the radio, letting some low-volume music play. I told myself to calm down, that everything was fine. The rest of the drive that night was quiet. No sign of any strange figures. When I got home, I felt a little better, like maybe it was just a one-time thing. The next morning, I saw Sam again. I told him I didn't see anyone this time. He laughed and said maybe the ghost, he used that word, though I didn't like it, was taking a break. I tried to joke back, but I still felt uneasy. I found myself replaying the moment I passed that man on the roadside. I kept picturing his motionless stance and how he didn't move much except to raise his arm. I remembered the dark eyes. I recalled the angle of his chin and how I couldn't see any clear expression, just a kind of emptiness. A couple of weeks went by, and I didn't see anything unusual. I drove the same road a few more times at night. Some nights I felt anxious and scanned the ditches and shoulders obsessively. Other nights I managed to distract myself by thinking about work or listening to a podcast, but that memory never fully left me. It sat in the back of my mind, waiting to pop up whenever I found myself alone on a dark stretch of road. Eventually, I told a few other coworkers about it. I tried to phrase it casually, like I was telling a weird anecdote. To my surprise, 2 people said they'd heard about the same thing. One claimed she knew someone who saw a man matching the description years ago. Another said he read a post on a local forum where drivers talked about a similar incident. Nobody had a definite explanation, but they all seemed convinced there was at least some truth behind it. Maybe it's a local person, maybe a drifter, or maybe someone who shows up now and then for reasons nobody understands. I still drive that road a few times a week. I keep my eyes open. I don't let myself get too comfortable because I half expect to see him again. Part of me wants to confirm it, to see if it's really a living person who just hides in the brush. Another part of me wants nothing to do with it. That sense of dread I felt that first night isn't something I want to experience again. I remember the sweat on my palms and the stiffness in my neck. I recall how my chest tightened when I realized he wasn't in the rear view anymore. That feeling was so strong. If it's just a regular guy looking for a ride, I'd feel a little bad not helping. But the way he stood there, motionless and quiet, Makes me wonder if there's more to it. I have no proof. I haven't talked to the police and I don't plan to. I doubt they'd find anyone out there unless they happen to drive by at the exact moment he appears. Sometimes on slower work days, I think back to how my coworker Sam reacted. He wasn't shocked. He treated it like a known curiosity in the area. That tells me this isn't some elaborate story I made up in my head. Other people have had similar encounters. I'm not the only person who's driven past that lonely figure on the side of the road and wondered if they should pull over. I won't lie. I feel relieved that nobody got hurt in these stories. I've never heard about any assaults or accidents connected to this man. It's just a strange sighting that makes people question themselves. I guess that's why I've accepted it as part of that commute. When I see a shape on the roadside now, I slow down enough to check my surroundings. I try to stay alert. If it's a real person in distress, I'll consider calling for help or directing them to a gas station. But if it's that same guy with the blank face, I'm not sure I'd have the courage to stop. The uncertainty is too strong. I've gone over that moment in my head many times. I think about the possibility of a simple explanation. Maybe he was just a drifter. Maybe he didn't want to be seen. Maybe he quickly ducked behind a bush. The road is lined with thick grass and patches of trees, so hiding wouldn't be hard. Still, I can't shake the unsettling feeling I got. The memory of his eyes and the way he raised his arm keeps returning at random times, like when I'm alone in the office or when I'm lying in bed and can't sleep. I guess that's my story. I drove home late one night, saw a stranger on the side of a dark highway, and then he disappeared. The next day I found out it's a common story in that region and nobody can fully explain it. The man doesn't hurt anyone and doesn't chase after cars. He just appears, signals like he wants a ride, and then vanishes. Maybe he's a real person with some reason for hiding. Maybe he's something else. I don't have answers. All I know is I felt a wave of dread that evening, and it wasn't just my imagination. I know what I saw. I haven't told my family much about it because they'd worry. I don't want them calling me late at night to check if I'm okay on the drive home. As far as I'm concerned, it's something that happened once. I'm careful now. I don't plan to investigate or look for that man. I'm aware of the rumors and stories, but I'm leaving it at that. If it was a mistake or a trick of my eyes, so be it. If it was a person who needed a ride, then maybe he found help somewhere else. In any case, I'm not eager to find out. So that's why I say the story is realistic. It could have been a regular guy. He might have crouched down or run into the bushes. There's no big ending or tragic result. Nobody died or got hurt. It's just one of those strange encounters people in the area talk about sometimes. I saw him, and then he was gone. That's the whole thing. And the only evidence is my memory and the uneasy feeling in my gut whenever I remember his blank stare. I still feel my stomach tighten when I think about that night. I was at the diner where I work, wiping down the last table near the front window. The place was empty except for me, and the only sounds were the buzz of the neon sign outside and the hum of the refrigerator. It was almost 11 p.m. and I was tired. My back was sore from leaning over the fryer and the grill all evening. I usually close up alone on weekdays because the boss doesn't want to pay for a second person that late. I'm used to it. It's not a dangerous part of town, but it's not exactly busy after dark either. I turned off most of the lights, did one last check of the counter, and locked the front door behind me. The cold air hit my face right away. It wasn't winter, but the nights felt chilly, and I was only wearing a thin jacket over my uniform shirt. My breath came out in short puffs as I exhaled. The street was quiet, and there were only a few parked cars along the curb. The glow of a distant street lamp made everything look pale and washed out. I could hear my own footsteps on the sidewalk, a dull echo against the empty buildings. I parked my car 2 blocks down because there's rarely a spot right in front of the diner. Sometimes I get lucky, but that night I didn't. As I walked, I thought about how I hate those 2 blocks. It's not a long distance, but when it's late and you're alone, it feels different. Every rustle of leaves or distant engine gets your attention. I stuffed my hands in my jacket pockets to keep them warm. I looked around every few seconds, making sure I wasn't missing anything behind me or beside me. When I reached the corner before my car, I saw a dark figure near it. I squinted, trying to figure out if it was someone waiting for a ride or just a random person passing by. The streetlight was weak, so I could only make out a silhouette. I slowed down and tried to see what was happening. The person was leaning forward, looking into my driver's side window, almost like he was studying it. He had one hand on the door handle. I froze for a second because it looked like he was messing with the lock. My heart started pounding in my chest and my fingers curled into fists without me even realizing it. I decided to speak up. My voice came out sounding rough. "Need some help there?" I asked. He turned around slowly and I saw his face in the dim light. He was around my height, maybe an inch taller, and he had short hair under a baseball cap. He didn't look drunk or high, just calm. Too calm for someone who might be confused about a car. He gave me this strange smile, not showing his teeth. "I thought this was my car," he said, not moving away from the door. I felt a chill go through me. It wasn't that cold, but my skin prickled with goosebumps. I knew that if you think a car is yours by mistake, you usually step back when the real owner appears. But he just stood there watching me. I could feel my pulse in my neck, and I swallowed hard. I didn't want to escalate anything, but I didn't want to seem weak either. "You sure?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "because this is definitely mine." I tried to laugh a little, like I was still being friendly, but my nerves were on edge. The laugh died in my throat. He stayed where he was. He glanced back at the interior, then turned his attention to me again. "You work late," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something off about the way he said it. I felt my stomach tighten even more. My palms started sweating, and I took a step back, keeping the distance between us. "Yeah, I closed the diner down the street," I said, nodding in the direction I'd come from. He moved one step closer to me. I caught a whiff of cheap cologne, mixed with the smell of the street at night. My mouth went dry. I considered taking out my phone, but I worried that pulling out something like that could trigger him. I also thought about running around him, but I didn't want him to grab me. I reached into my pocket for my keys instead. My voice came out lower than I expected. "Look, if you're confused, maybe you should check your license plate or something." I knew that sounded a bit confrontational, but I wanted him to move back. He tilted his head. "No need. I was wrong about it." He didn't budge. He just stood there, eyes fixed on me like I was an object he was studying. I felt my pulse in my eardrums. It was a heavy thump, thump, thump. My thoughts raced. I tried to guess if he had a weapon, but I didn't see anything in his hands. That didn't mean he wasn't carrying something in his jacket. I took a short breath and pressed the button on my key fob to unlock and then lock the car. The headlights flashed and the horn chirped once. That made me jump a little, but it also made him step back. He didn't go far, just enough to let me walk closer to the driver's side door. I kept my eye on him. My hands were shaking and my throat felt tight. I opened the driver's door. I could see the interior light come on, and that felt like a small relief. At least I could see inside, and there was no one there. I slid into the seat quickly. My heart was still pounding, and I fumbled with the key in the ignition. Come on," I mumbled under my breath. I turned on the engine, and at that moment, I glanced up at him through the windshield. He was staring at me. His expression didn't change. His eyes were locked on mine. A second felt like 10 seconds, and I couldn't look away, even though I wanted to. I felt like if I blinked, something would happen. Finally, I shifted into drive and hit the gas, peeling away from the curb faster than usual. My tires made a short screeching sound on the pavement. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. He stood there, still facing my direction, his hands in his pockets. He didn't wave or shout. He just stayed there, watching my taillights fade. I didn't breathe normally until I reached the main road. My chest felt tight and I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I forced myself to inhale and exhale a few times. My breath was shaky and my mouth was still dry. I checked all my mirrors repeatedly, afraid I might see him following me in another car. But the road behind me was empty. I felt a slight sense of relief, but I couldn't shake the tension. I noticed the sweat on my forehead, and the top of my shirt was damp around the collar. The city streets passed by in a blur of traffic lights and closed storefronts. I turned on the radio just to fill the silence, but I couldn't focus on the music. My mind was replaying the moment he said, "You work late, huh?" over and over. When I got home, I parked in my assigned spot outside my building. My fingers fumbled with the house keys and I almost dropped them twice. I kept looking around, half expecting that guy to appear out of the shadows. The building entrance was well lit, so I felt a bit safer, but I still rushed inside as fast as I could. Once I locked my apartment door behind me, I leaned my back against it and closed my eyes. My heart was still thumping in my chest. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand and noticed I was shaking. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face staring through the windshield. Around 3 a.m., I finally dozed off from sheer exhaustion. I woke up the next morning with a knot in my neck, probably from how tense I'd been. I thought about calling the police, but he didn't actually do anything except act suspicious. I doubted they'd do more than write a short report. I couldn't prove he was trying to break in, and he didn't threaten me with anything other than his weird behavior. The next evening, I went back to work. The diner looked the same as always, bright lights, the same customers stopping by for coffee or burgers. I tried to keep my mind off the night before, but around 10:30 p.m. I started feeling anxious. My hands got cold, and I couldn't focus on cleaning up. I asked my coworker to help me close, even though it meant paying him out of my own pocket for an extra hour. I didn't want to walk to my car alone again. He looked at me a bit confused, but agreed because he could use the cash. When we were done, I locked the front door, and we both headed out. I could tell my coworker was curious, but I didn't feel like explaining much. I just said, "I don't like walking by myself at this hour." He shrugged and walked next to me, talking about random stuff to fill the silence. It helped a bit. My shoulders were tense, but at least I didn't feel as vulnerable. He stayed with me until I got in my car. Then he waved goodbye and headed to his own car parked on another street. I kept expecting to see that same figure or a similar face lurking near the trunk, but there was no one around. I got in, locked the doors, and drove off. My eyes darted from mirror to mirror, scanning every vehicle behind me. Nothing stood out. By the time I got home, I was still on edge, but it was better than the night before. The next week, I started parking as close as possible to the diner. Sometimes I'd get lucky and find a spot right across the street. Sometimes I'd still have to walk half a block, but I tried to avoid those 2-block walks. I asked my boss if we could reserve a space behind the building, but he said that wasn't possible. I almost considered taking a cab home on nights I close, but that cost would eat into my already small paycheck. One particular night, maybe a month later, I went through the normal routine. I closed at 11 p.m., wiped down the tables, turned off the lights, and stepped outside. The sidewalk was empty. The neon sign flickered off. My car was across the street, not too far, which made me feel better. Still, I felt that same knot in my stomach. I scanned the sidewalk and looked around the parked cars. No one was out there, at least not that I could see. I made my way to my car, got in quickly, and locked the doors right away. My heart rate was picking up, even though there was no reason for it that night. It was just leftover anxiety. I started the engine and glanced around one last time. No one was there. I reminded myself that nothing serious had happened except a tense encounter, but it was enough to keep me looking over my shoulder. Sometimes I wonder if he was planning on stealing my car, or if he was just checking random vehicles for easy targets. He could have been someone who wanted to rob me directly. I don't know, but that weird smile and the way he said, "You work late, huh?" still sits in my gut. It felt like a warning or a hint that he knew my routine. The idea of someone watching my habits at night creeps me out. I told a couple of friends about it, and they all said the same thing. Change your habits. Be aware of your surroundings. Maybe carry some pepper spray. I keep a small can in my pocket now just in case. I also make sure to vary my closing routine when possible, though there's only so much I can do. The diner's schedule is the diner's schedule. I can't change the time it closes, and I can't magically create a parking spot right at the door. I haven't seen that guy again, at least not that I recognize. Part of me expects him to reappear one night, standing by the same spot, waiting to see if I show up. That thought makes my stomach feel tight. I try not to dwell on it too much because I still have to live my life, but I can't deny that my sense of security took a hit that night. I used to walk to my car without thinking twice. Now I keep my keys in my hand, checking every shadow before I unlock my door. That's the whole story. No big violence, no big blow-up, just a tense moment in a dark street. But it was enough to make me question how safe I really am when I'm out there alone, especially late at night. I don't think I'll ever forget that face, the way he stared into my car and then into my eyes, like he was challenging me. It made me feel exposed. I still park as close as I can to the diner. I don't want to be in that situation again, standing there with my heart hammering, unsure if the next move would be a sudden attack or just a weird conversation. Either way, I'm not taking that risk twice. I moved into this old apartment thinking it would be a fresh start. I was wrong. Right on the first night, I noticed something that made me uneasy. I was tired from carrying boxes and cleaning the place, so I collapsed on the couch around midnight. The lights were off, and the only thing I heard was the hum of the fridge. About an hour later, I woke up because of a dripping sound. It wasn't loud, but it was steady enough to keep me from falling back asleep. I checked the sink in the bathroom first, but it was dry. Then I walked into the kitchen. I heard the drip, drip, drip somewhere above me. The ceiling looked old, with a few cracks near the corners. I thought maybe a pipe was leaking inside the walls. I didn't see any water stains or damp patches. The floor was dry. Still, the sound kept going like a dripping faucet, but it wasn't coming from the kitchen faucet itself. It seemed higher up, closer to the ceiling. I didn't have the energy to investigate more that night, so I went back to the couch and tried to ignore it. The next day, I bought a stepladder and a flashlight. I decided to check the attic space or whatever was above the kitchen ceiling. The apartment was on the top floor, so there wasn't another unit up there. There was an old crawl space with a panel in the hallway. I pushed it open and shined my flashlight inside. It was dusty, full of cobwebs, and I saw a few pieces of old insulation. No sign of a leak. No puddles of water, no damp spots. I stayed up there for maybe 15 minutes, checking every corner I could reach. Nothing. So I went back down, sealed the panel, and figured maybe it was just some random pipe noise. But then the dripping continued the next few nights, always around 3 a.m. Sometimes it lasted a minute or two. Other times it went on for half an hour. It wasn't loud enough to call the maintenance guy at that hour, so I just dealt with it. I tried earplugs. They helped a little, but I could still feel the faint rhythm of those drops. I got frustrated. I even thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, or maybe it was the old building settling. Still, it kept me on edge. About a week later, something else happened. I woke up in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. because of that same dripping sound. I decided I'd had enough. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and flicked the light switch. But nothing happened. The light didn't turn on. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The dripping was still going. I reached out, feeling my way to the countertop, and finally found my phone to use it as a flashlight. I pointed the phone's light toward the sink. The faucet was dripping this time. It was actually dripping, like it was half open. I know for a fact I turned it off tightly before I went to bed because I have a habit of checking. I'm a little obsessive about that stuff. I twisted the faucet closed. I stood there, listening. The sound stopped. No water hitting the sink. Then I realized the curtain by the small window next to the fridge was swaying a bit, like a breeze had just gone by. That window is usually closed. I walked over and checked. It was still locked from the inside. I put my hand against it to see if there was a draft. Nothing. No wind. The curtain was still moving slightly, but slowing down. I looked around the kitchen. Everything else seemed in place. No open cabinets, no drawers pulled out, no sign of forced entry. I went to the hallway to check the breaker, thinking maybe the power was out. That's when I heard the fridge hum again, so the power wasn't out. I flipped the kitchen switch off and on a few times. The light never came on. I walked back to the living room. The TV was off and its little standby light was dark, like it was unplugged. I went over to check the cord. It was plugged in. I tried turning the TV on. Nothing happened. Then I noticed the cable box was also off. Usually it displays the time, but it was blank. It seemed like just the living room and kitchen outlets were out. The hallway light was on, though. The bathroom light worked too. This made me think there was a partial electrical problem. I switched the breaker for those areas off and on again. After a couple tries, the kitchen light finally came back. I heard the TV power up, and the cable box lights returned. But when I went back to the living room, the TV was out of sync. It showed static, like it had lost the channel settings. I'd never seen it do that before. I had to rescan everything. I didn't sleep much that night. My heart kept pounding, like I'd had too much caffeine. I found myself glancing at the window curtain and the faucet every few minutes. I even checked the main door lock, which seemed fine. Everything was locked from inside. It felt strange, almost like someone had walked through the kitchen, messed with the faucet, then left without a trace. But that didn't make sense. If they had some key, I would have heard the door open. My apartment's door is pretty noisy. It creaks when you open it even a little. The next morning, I called the maintenance guy and asked him to check the pipes and the wiring. He came over around midday. He tested the kitchen light switch, checked the breaker, and said everything looked fine. He ran the faucet, tested the water pressure, and found no leaks underneath. I told him about the crawl space, but he said there's nothing up there except old insulation and some wiring for the building's ventilation system. He also said the building was about 40 years old, so some weird creaks and drips might just be part of the place's charm. He tried to calm me, saying it was normal. I wasn't so sure, but he left me with that explanation. That evening, I talked to the building superintendent, a guy named Roberto. I asked him if there were any reports of break-ins or weird plumbing problems. He gave me a knowing look and said, "You mean you're hearing noises at night?" I nodded. He told me the last tenant complained about the same things: dripping noises at odd hours, lights flickering, TV losing signal for no reason. That got me on edge even more. I asked him if that tenant ever found a cause. Roberto shrugged and said, "The tenant blamed the building's age or maybe someone sneaking around. Nothing was proven." That night, I double-checked everything before going to bed. I made sure the windows were locked, the door was bolted, the faucet was closed. I even unplugged the TV just to see if that made any difference. I fell asleep around midnight, feeling exhausted but determined to see if anything would happen again. Sure enough, at 3 a.m., I jerked awake. It was the same sound. Drip, drip, drip. I got up quietly, not turning on any lights. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, feeling my pulse in my ears. My palms felt sweaty. The hallway was dark, but I could see a faint glow from outside streetlights in the living room. When I reached the kitchen entrance, I noticed the faucet was dripping again. This time the water flow seemed stronger, like the handle was turned almost halfway. I froze. My mind started racing. Did I forget to close it? No. I remembered turning it off. I flicked it on and off a few times, then closed it again. The dripping stopped. Right then I heard a quick shuffle behind me, near the living room. I spun around, expecting to see someone. The living room was empty. The curtains in there were still. The door was locked. I forced myself to walk over and check the door. It was still bolted from the inside. I felt my chest tighten. My hands were shaking a bit. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. I tried to tell myself that it was an old building with bad plumbing or something, but the faucet handle being turned like that didn't feel like a random pipe issue. Someone had to move it. But there was no one in the apartment except me. I looked around the apartment for anything out of place. All the windows were closed and the locks were intact. No new footprints on the dusty spots near the windows. The corridor outside my apartment was quiet, and the main door was locked. I checked the chain from the inside too. Everything was secure. I went back to the kitchen, opened and closed every cabinet, and looked under the sink. Nothing. I went to bed feeling uneasy. I left a small lamp on in the bedroom just to calm my nerves. Over the next week, the same pattern repeated. Around 3 a.m., I'd hear the dripping sound. Sometimes it was mild, sometimes it was loud enough that I got up instantly. Every time the faucet handle was partially open, the curtain would sway as if someone had just walked by. One night, the living room TV lost all channels, even though I'd set them earlier in the day. Another night, the kitchen light wouldn't turn on until I flipped the breaker. I asked Roberto again if anyone else had keys to my place. He said the building had a master key for emergencies, but it was kept in a locked cabinet. Maintenance staff only used it with a work order, and they logged every time they took it. There was no record of it being used on my unit at night. He said I could change the locks if I wanted. I did. I went out, bought a new lock, installed it. That night, the same thing happened. At 3 a.m., drip, drip, drip. I ran to the kitchen, flipped on the light, and saw the faucet dripping. The rest of the apartment was still. No sign of forced entry. I felt trapped in some weird cycle. I tried staying awake from midnight to 3 a.m. to catch whatever was happening, but on those nights, nothing happened. It was only when I fell asleep that I'd be woken up by the sound. I started losing sleep. I looked tired all the time. My coworkers asked if I was stressed. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just said I was having trouble sleeping in a new place. But inside, I was edgy. My nerves were shot, and I couldn't focus during the day. Eventually, I set up a cheap webcam in the kitchen, aimed at the sink, to record overnight. I wanted proof that the faucet was turning on by itself, or that someone was sneaking in. I connected it to my laptop and set it to record from midnight to 4 a.m. The next morning, I checked the video. The faucet started dripping around 3:02 a.m. The handle clearly moved, but I couldn't see a hand. It was too grainy and dark. The only light was from a small nightlight near the door. The handle just moved, almost like it jerked on its own. The curtain in the background fluttered slightly, but there was no shape or figure. No shadow. No reflection. I felt sick to my stomach. I replayed it several times. I saw the same thing. There was movement, but it didn't make sense. I showed the video to a friend, and he said maybe the handle was loose or the water pressure changed, but that wouldn't explain why it happened at the same time every night. He told me I should just move out, but I didn't have the money to break my lease. I showed the video to Roberto. He watched it, shook his head, and said he didn't know what to tell me. He reminded me the last tenant moved out early because of these issues. The management never found any physical cause. He asked me if I ever felt threatened. I said not physically, but it was messing with my head. He suggested I ignore it or learn to live with it. That wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I didn't have many options. The apartment kept doing it every few nights. I started sleeping with the radio on to drown out any dripping sounds, and some nights I wore noise-canceling headphones. But the faucet would still end up dripping. Sometimes I'd find the kitchen light flickering. Sometimes the TV was completely out of tune when I woke up. I never found footprints, never found damage to the locks, never saw any sign of a break-in. The place was always locked from the inside, too. I tried everything, checking the faucet washers, replacing the entire faucet with a new one, sealing the window with tape to see if it was opening. Nothing solved it. After a couple of months, I decided I'd had enough. The stress was wearing me down and I couldn't sleep. I wasn't exactly scared for my life, but I was jumpy all the time. I told the building's management that I was leaving. I explained the situation to them, and they let me break the lease with a penalty. I paid the fee and started looking for a new place. I never found proof of who or what was messing around at 3 a.m. Roberto told me he'd heard stories about that apartment for a few years. He said no one stayed there long. Maybe it was just the building's old wiring and plumbing. Maybe there was someone with a hidden key. I'll never really know. All I can say is that it felt too deliberate to be a random leak. The handle was always physically turned. The curtains always moved as if someone passed by. The TV was always messed up, as if it was unplugged or the input was changed. But no matter what I did, I couldn't catch anyone in the act, and there was no sign of forced entry. It left me with more questions than answers. Even now, thinking back, I can't point to anything that's downright impossible. It could have been some extremely quiet intruder, or some bizarre malfunction in the plumbing and electrical systems. Nothing I saw defied the laws of nature, but it sure felt wrong. It felt like there was someone or something in that apartment at night, moving around, flipping faucets and messing with the TV, leaving no trace. I'm in a new apartment now. It's not fancy, but at least it's quiet. Sometimes I wake up at night expecting to hear that drip, 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 but it's just silence. I remember that old place and get a weird feeling in my stomach. I know it wasn't a dream. I went up to the crawl space, changed the lock, set up the camera. I tried everything. Still, I never found a solid reason for what happened. The building management just shrugged it off. The last tenant apparently complained about it too. Maybe it's just one of those unexplainable occurrences in old buildings. I don't really know. But the feeling of standing there in my pajamas at 3 a.m., watching the faucet drip even though I'd closed it hours before, is something I'll never forget. And if anyone ever asks me about weird experiences in old apartments, I tell them this story. It's real enough to make you wonder, and yet there's no proof of anything supernatural. It's just something that happened, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. I still remember the night I realized how strange a place can feel when you're alone, even if you've been there 1,000 times. I work in a commercial building that's mostly offices. During the day, it's busy, people coming in and out, phones ringing, everyone in a rush. But at night, the place turns into a different environment. I often stay late because my workload is heavy, and the regular social elevator gets turned off in the evening. That means I have to use the service elevator, which is down a side hallway near the maintenance room. It's usually quiet at that hour. Sometimes I'd see the janitor or a security guard, but mostly it's just me walking around empty corridors. I started working in this building a year ago. I'm a straightforward guy, and I've never been one to believe in ghosts or anything like that. I keep my head down, do my job, and go home. The late shifts never bothered me because it's nice to finish everything without distractions. Around 9 or 10 at night, the main lights in the hallways are on, but some of the smaller offices switch their lights off completely. It can get dim, but I got used to it. The service elevator itself is nothing fancy, just an older elevator with metal walls, a small overhead light, and that typical stale smell. One night, I wrapped up around 10:30. I'd been proofreading a big report for hours and my eyes were tired. I shut down my computer and left my office. I walked to the hallway, noticing how the floor was mostly dark, except for a few emergency lights. I headed toward the service elevator. My legs were stiff from sitting all day, so I walked a bit slower. I saw the usual sign on the social elevator. Turned off after 8 p.m., use service elevator. Nothing new there. I pressed the call button for the service elevator and waited. The building's air conditioning was still running, but the air felt heavier. I don't know if it was just me being tired, but everything felt a bit off. Sometimes if I'm alone in a quiet space, my mind picks up on small noises, maybe a faint buzzing or a click from somewhere. I remember hearing my own breathing echo in the hallway. After a moment, the doors slid open, and I stepped in. I pressed the button for the ground floor, where the parking garage exit is. The elevator started moving down smoothly. I shifted my briefcase from one hand to the other and looked at the scratched walls and the small overhead light. The reflection on those metal walls can be a bit warped, so I never pay much attention to it. Usually it goes straight to the ground floor without stopping, especially at that hour. But this time, I felt a slight jolt. The elevator slowed and then stopped at some floor that looked completely unlit. The doors opened right up. I leaned out a little, half expecting the sensor was triggered by someone. There were no lights in that hallway, no movement. It felt like a power outage on that floor, or maybe nobody used it at all. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. The darkness looked thick, almost like a curtain. I could see faint shapes of walls, but there weren't any windows providing light. It was pitch black and it smelled a bit stale, maybe from disuse. The doors just stayed open. The elevator didn't move. I was a little annoyed, so I kept pressing the close door button. Nothing happened for a few seconds and it felt long. My heart rate picked up because I couldn't see a reason for the elevator to stop there. Finally, the doors started closing. I exhaled and tried to calm down, figuring it was just a glitch. Then, as the doors were about to shut completely, they jolted again, like something had triggered the sensor. But I didn't see any hand or object blocking the entrance. I stepped forward and looked around, but nobody was there. I was sure of it. At that point, I got an uneasy feeling, so I pressed the button again, hard. The doors closed and the elevator continued downward. My shoulders were tense. I shook my head and told myself, "It's late. I'm tired. That was just a malfunction." Then I looked at the reflective surface in front of me. I saw my own face, a bit pale from the overhead light. My eyes looked wide. That's when I noticed something else in the reflection, a figure behind me. It was a man, tall, with short hair, standing still at the back corner of the elevator. My heart started pounding. My palms got sweaty, and my mouth went dry. I spun around instantly, expecting to see someone just a foot away, but there was nobody there. I froze for a second, my ears ringing. The elevator was empty except for me. The overhead light flickered a bit, but that was it. No one was there. It's not a big elevator, so if there was a person, I would have seen him right away. My chest felt tight. Part of me wanted to punch the emergency stop and run out, but we were already moving down. I found myself staring at the back wall, trying to figure out if there was any weird shadow. There wasn't anything that looked like a man standing there. The elevator dinged on the ground floor and the doors opened. I basically stumbled out, not even looking back to see if the doors closed properly. My footsteps sounded heavy in the empty lobby. The security guard was at the front desk, but he was reading a magazine. He looked up and asked if everything was okay. I hesitated. I wasn't sure how to explain what I saw. I ended up just saying, "Yeah, I'm fine. Elevator was acting weird." He shrugged and went back to his magazine. I walked out to the parking garage. My hands were trembling as I took my car keys out. I felt silly, like I was letting my imagination go wild. But I know what I saw, or at least I know what it looked like. In the reflection, there was a person behind me. When I got home, I told myself to drop it. I made a sandwich, watched some TV, and tried to forget. I even thought about how reflections can be distorted. Maybe it was just a trick of the light or my own shape at a weird angle. But it didn't feel that way at the time. It felt too real. The next few days, I tried to keep my routine. I stayed late again, finishing up tasks. Everything was normal, except I caught myself checking the time more often. I didn't want to be in that elevator too close to midnight, or even 10 p.m. One evening around 9, I decided to take the stairs. It's a bit of a trek from the 12th floor down to the ground floor, especially after a full day of work. But I did it. By the time I reached my car, my legs were burning and I was out of breath. But at least I didn't have that tense feeling. I felt safer, even if it was irrational. Stairs can be creepy too, but at least I could see everything in front of me. Of course, I couldn't keep avoiding the elevator forever. The next night, I was too tired to do the stairs again. My knees were hurting a bit, so I went to the service elevator. This time, it went straight to the ground floor without any stops. I still felt on edge, but nothing unusual happened. The following week, I worked late again, but I kept noticing that I'd flinch when the elevator slowed down. If it stopped at a floor, I'd get this spike of adrenaline, just in case the doors opened to a dark hallway. But usually they opened to a lit floor and occasionally a janitor might get in. Those nights were quiet but predictable. Still, I couldn't shake the memory. That night, the dark hallway, the reflection. It lingered in the back of my mind. Sometimes I found myself glancing at the mirrored wall, half expecting to see someone behind me. My posture changed. I started standing near the elevator doors so I could see the entire elevator behind me. I realized I was acting paranoid, but I just couldn't stand facing the metal wall anymore. I kept thinking, what if I see that figure again? One time, about 2 weeks later, the elevator stopped on a floor that looked mostly dark. The overhead lighting was dim, like it was just an emergency bulb. I tensed up. The doors slid open and I saw maybe one flickering light in the hallway. It looked deserted. No one got in. I pressed door close repeatedly. My hand was shaking. When the doors shut, I braced myself and looked in the reflection. There was only me, no one else. I let out a breath, but my heart was still racing. After a month of nights like that, I started planning my schedule to leave before it got too late. If I left by 8 p.m., I could still use the social elevator. Sometimes I managed that, but when I didn't, I either forced myself down the service elevator or took the stairs if I wasn't too exhausted. Eventually, I told one coworker about it. He's not the type to laugh at me. I explained I saw something in the elevator reflection. He asked, "Did you see someone enter behind you?" I said no, and he just patted my shoulder and said, "Look, man, maybe you were just tired. That building's old, the service elevator's old too. Weird stuff happens." He didn't make a big deal out of it, which helped me feel less crazy. Still, every time I have to work late, I remember that night. The memory pops up whenever I press the elevator button. I think about that dark floor, the open doors, the stale air, and then that sudden moment I saw a figure behind me in the reflection. It felt so real. But when I turned, there was no one. No sound of movement, no sense of another person's presence. I was alone. Yet I know I saw someone, even if it was just for a second. It's possible I tricked my own eyes because of the metal's reflection or the overhead light. Our minds can do funny things, especially when we're alone in a tense setting. I do find it realistic for a few reasons. First, some floors in this building barely get used at night, so they don't turn on the main lights there. If the elevator stops, it's just a dark, empty space. Second, reflections in those metal walls can be misleading. The shape of the elevator might distort any movement. And third, sometimes weird things happen that we can't easily explain. It doesn't mean it's supernatural. It can be a coincidence, an electrical glitch, or just me being overworked. I'm not saying I believe I was haunted, I just know the experience left me shaken. Since then, I mostly avoid that elevator after hours. I either leave earlier or suck it up and take the stairs. I still work in the same building. I see the same corridors and that same sign saying the social elevator is off after 8 p.m. But every time I have to ride that service elevator late at night, I feel my chest tighten. I get this mild dread before I even press the button. When it arrives, I usually peek inside first, as if checking to see if someone's already in there. Then I step in and stand as close to the doors as I can. I watch the floor numbers go down. I try not to look at the reflection at all, or if I do, I just glance quickly to confirm I'm alone. I haven't seen that figure again. It's been months, but the feeling never went away entirely. Even when nothing happens, I still recall that one time. I remember the doors opening on a dark floor. Nobody there. The feeling of my skin crawling, pressing the button over and over. And then that image behind me. The man who wasn't there. There's a rational explanation, I'm sure, but the memory is vivid. Every now and then I catch myself replaying the moment, wondering if I really saw it or if it was just a shadow. But I can't change it now. It happened. I experienced it. I wish I could say there was a dramatic ending. Like I discovered the elevator was haunted or that I spoke to a security guard who saw something similar. But that never happened. Everything else stayed normal. Nobody else in the building mentioned seeing anything like that. No one complained about the elevator stopping on random floors. It's just a story I have. A piece of my own experience that taught me sometimes things that seem ordinary can feel terrifying if the circumstances line up the wrong way. I still work late sometimes. I still hate that elevator at night. But life goes on, and I have a job to do. If I'm exhausted and can't handle the stairs, I'll step into that elevator, keep my eyes forward, and hope it goes straight to the ground floor. If it stops on an empty floor again, I'll probably do what I did before. I'll press the close door button until it obeys. Then I'll clench my fists and pray I don't see anyone in the reflection. That's my routine now. It's become a part of how I deal with late nights in that old building. I guess that's all there is to it. It feels real because it probably was just a set of small coincidences that happened in the dark. There's no big twist, no hidden meaning. It happened, it freaked me out, and now I'm more cautious. That's my story. I can't prove anything, but I know I don't want to experience it again. So most nights you'll find me limping down the stairs, breathing heavily, and telling myself it's worth the trouble. At least on the stairs I can see what's around me. I can see if someone is there, or if no one is, and that makes it a little easier to keep going. I never expected my night shift at a 24-hour diner to be anything more than a string of half-asleep orders and casual small talk. I went into this job thinking I'd just take orders, flip burgers, and watch the clock until sunrise. I didn't think I'd ever feel my heart pounding against my ribs while staring at a customer with sweaty palms. But that night, everything shifted. It taught me that even a late-night burger joint can become a stage for something unsettling. I want to lay it all out exactly as it happened, without embellishments or fancy words, because that's the only way I can make sense of it. I've been working the graveyard shift for about 6 months. I clock in at midnight and stay until 8 in the morning. Most nights are quiet. Occasionally, a few regulars wander in around 2 or 3 in the morning. They're usually taxi drivers, shift workers, or people coming from bars. I see them every night and they see me, and there's no big drama. I'm a pretty big guy and I don't spook easily, but there's something about the emptiness of the place after midnight that can make small things feel bigger. The silence can make any weird noise stand out. On a normal night, I settle into the rhythm, check the coffee pots, make sure the hot plates are stocked, restock the sauce packets, and wipe down the counters. That's my world. Sometimes my coworker from the previous shift leaves behind some undone tasks, so I pick up the slack. The place has a small dining area with 6 tables, a counter with 4 stools, and a back area where we do most of the cooking. Off to the side, there's a door that leads to a tiny office. The manager keeps petty cash and inventory records in there, plus some sensitive paperwork. There's also a small safe in the corner, though it doesn't hold much. Still, it's locked, and the door to that office is usually locked too, especially at night. I started double-checking that lock when weird people began showing up, just to be safe. One night, around 3:30 a.m., I noticed this guy come in. He looked tired, with bags under his eyes, but he was oddly energetic at the same time. He had this jittery way of moving, like he was trying not to stand still. He wore a dark jacket, jeans, and a pair of running shoes that had seen better days. He walked up to the counter and flashed me a quick smile. It wasn't a friendly smile, more like he was trying to appear casual, but ended up looking tense. "Hey," he said, speaking fast. "What kind of sandwiches you got?" I pulled out a menu and slid it across the counter. "All kinds. We got burgers, chicken sandwiches, BLTs, grilled cheese, ham and cheese, tuna melt. The usual stuff, man." He nodded quickly, tapping his fingers on the counter. Right. So you guys stay open all night? Like 24 hours for real?" "We never close," I said. "Someone's here at all hours." He scanned the menu but kept looking up at me, then over my shoulder, and then toward the office door. It made my neck tense. I couldn't figure out why he'd care about that door. Most customers barely notice it. It's just a plain door with a small sign that says "Office." But this guy's eyes kept drifting to it, then back to me. "You guys get a lot of business at this time?" he asked, leaning in slightly. "Sometimes," I said, shrugging. "Depends on the night." He gave a quick smile again, tapping the menu. "So, do you work here alone, or do you have someone in the back?" I felt a little jolt in my gut. Nobody usually asks that, especially not so directly. "Sometimes I'm alone, sometimes not," I lied. In reality, I was alone most of the time, but I didn't want to spell that out. "Depends on the schedule." He kept nodding like he was trying to collect bits of information. His eyes flicked once more to the door, then he asked about the burgers. "How big are they? You do quarter pound or something bigger?" I told him we do a quarter pound standard, but we can make it a double if he wants. He said he'd think about it. Then he asked about the fries, the onion rings, the shakes. He wanted to know the exact ingredients of the BLT. He asked if we had any special sauce. The questions came rapid fire, one after the other, like he was stalling me. I answered patiently at first, but after about a minute I got irritated. It felt like he was stalling, and I was on edge. While I was talking, his attention kept darting back to that office door. I tried not to look over my shoulder too much, but I was aware of it now. My heart started pounding a little faster. I told myself maybe he was just curious, or maybe he wanted to ask for a job. But my gut said otherwise. There was something off in his body language. He'd glance at me, glance at the door, and then stare at me like he was reading my face. After a few minutes of this, I took a breath and decided to cut it short. "Look, do you know what you want to order?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He hesitated, then pointed to the cheeseburger on the menu. "I'll take the cheeseburger, just a single, and fries, and a large soda." "Sure thing. That'll be $8.50. I rang him up. He pulled out some crumpled bills, handed them to me, and I gave him his change. The entire time, his eyes never stopped moving. He took his receipt and stepped away from the counter. He didn't go to a table. Instead, he stood near the wall, kind of tucked in a corner, messing with his phone. But I noticed he wasn't really typing anything. He was mostly just looking up every few seconds. I went into the back to start on his burger. I have a small window there where I can still see part of the dining area, but not the corners. I tried to keep an eye on him. He stood there for a bit, glancing around. Then he looked out the window like he was checking the parking lot. At one point, I heard him clear his throat, but I didn't see him do much else. I finished cooking the burger and fries, placed them in a bag, and brought them to the counter. "Your order's ready," I said, trying to sound friendly. He walked over, took the bag, and said thanks. But he didn't leave. He walked back to the corner with his phone. He stood there for a good 2 or 3 minutes, just looking down, occasionally looking at me, and occasionally looking at the office door. I felt tense. Something about his stance told me he was waiting for a moment when I'd be distracted. My neck felt hot, and my palms got sweaty. I kept wiping them on my apron. I made a show of restocking the cups near the soda fountain so I could stay in the dining area. After a while, he started tapping his foot. He peeked at me again, and I stared right back. I wanted him to know I was watching. Eventually, he looked at the time on his phone and then let out a soft sigh. That's when I decided I should step away to appear normal, but my plan was to keep my ears open. I walked to the back to grab more paper napkins and sauce packets. The storage shelves are right around a short corner, so I was out of sight for maybe 10 seconds. As soon as I turned the corner, I heard a soft clanking noise. It sounded like someone jiggling a door handle. A chill shot through my body. My heart thumped, and I dropped the stack of sauce packets on the floor. I picked them up in a rush, practically stumbling as I ran back out front. When I got to the dining area, I saw him at the office door, twisting the knob. The door was locked, but he was pressing his shoulder against it, like he was testing how sturdy it was. As soon as he noticed me, he jumped back a bit, then turned toward me. He gave me this weird, almost smug grin. It made my stomach flip. He didn't say anything. He just turned on his heel and bolted toward the entrance. I rushed after him, but by the time I reached the door, he was already outside, running across the parking lot. It was dark out, and the few streetlights didn't offer much visibility, so I lost sight of him as soon as he passed the far edge of the lot. My body was shaking. My hands felt clammy, and my throat was tight. I stood at the entrance for a few seconds, scanning the lot. No sign of him. My heart was racing, and I could barely think straight. All I could picture was him smiling at me while he tried to break in. The look on his face was so casual, like he didn't care that I was watching him. It felt like he was confident he could get away with something if I hadn't shown up. I went back inside, made sure the door was locked, and then double-checked the office door. It was still locked, no damage, and the handle looked fine. I felt relieved, but still unnerved. I walked around the diner to see if he had messed with anything else. Everything looked normal. The only trace he left was a napkin on the table next to the corner where he stood. It was crumpled up and had some scribbles on it, but I couldn't make sense of them. just a few random lines, maybe doodles. I tossed it in the trash. I was too restless to sit down, so I went behind the counter and grabbed a rag. I started wiping the counters again, even though I'd already done it earlier. My mind raced with questions. Was he planning to rob the office? Did he think we kept a lot of cash in there? Would he come back? The rest of my shift felt like it stretched on forever. I stayed on high alert, glancing outside every few minutes to see if he had returned. Every little sound made me jump. If a car pulled up at the gas station across the street, I tensed up. If the wind rattled the door, I jerked my head up. I was waiting for him to burst back in, but he never came. By sunrise, I was mentally and physically drained. My manager came in for the morning shift, and I told him everything. He looked concerned and told me I did the right thing by locking everything up. He said I should keep that door locked at all times, not just sometimes. That's exactly what I started doing every night after that. I've been jumpy ever since. It's not like I'm terrified to come to work, but I feel different. Now, whenever I see someone walk in after midnight, I pay extra attention. I watch their eyes, their hands, and their interest in the office door. I always keep the safe locked, and I always keep the office door locked. I even started keeping the front door locked between customers for a while, but management said that looked bad for business. They told me just to be careful and to call the police if anything suspicious happens again. So now, I keep my phone on me, and I stay alert. I never heard anything more about that guy. We didn't file a police report because he didn't actually steal anything or break in. He tried, but he didn't succeed. There was no damage. Still, it left me with a lasting unease. It's hard to describe the feeling of watching someone trying to break into your workplace while you're standing right there, only a few feet away. It's a kind of helpless anger and adrenaline all at once. I keep replaying it in my head, thinking how it could have gone differently if the door had been unlocked. I'm thankful I locked it, and I'm thankful I happened to walk back when I did. I haven't seen him since. A few times I thought I spotted someone with a similar jacket outside, but it was usually just a passerby or a different customer. I guess he was just an opportunist, someone looking for a quick score. Maybe he figured a 24-hour diner in the middle of the night would have an office stuffed with cash. He probably didn't expect me to be as vigilant as I was. Now I'm more vigilant. Every time a fast-talking stranger comes in, I get flashbacks to that moment. But hey, I'm still here and nothing worse happened. I keep reminding myself that late-night places do attract a wide range of people. Most are harmless. Some are just lonely. Some are drunk. Some have nowhere else to go. But every now and then, someone comes along who wants more than just food. That guy didn't show a weapon. He didn't threaten me. He just tested the lock. That's enough to send a chill down my spine. I can still see that strange grin he gave me when he realized he was caught. Since that night, I always lock the office door as soon as I start my shift. I check it multiple times. I don't step into the back without listening carefully to what's going on in the front. If I hear any suspicious noise, I rush out to check. I'm not going to let anybody catch me off guard again. It's not like I can handle every dangerous situation on my own, but taking small precautions makes me feel a bit safer. We're not exactly in a high-crime area, but trouble can show up anywhere, especially after midnight. I haven't told many people about this incident because it's embarrassing to admit how rattled I got. But it was real, and it showed me that a quiet diner can become unsettling in the blink of an eye. I don't want to act like some paranoid security guard, but I also don't want to be stupid. People do weird things when they think no one is paying attention. And at 3 a.m., they might assume the night shift guy is half asleep or too bored to notice. I hope that guy never comes back. I'm not sure what I'd do if he did. I'd probably call the cops right away. Maybe I'd confront him if I had no other choice, but I'd rather not. I just want to do my job without feeling like someone's waiting for me to slip up. In the meantime, I'll keep the office door locked, and I'll keep one eye on anyone who seems a little too curious. That's the best I can do. I got on that bus route about a year ago. I had lost my old car after some mechanical issues that cost more than I could afford, so I started taking the bus to work again. At first, I felt uncomfortable. I wasn't used to the noise or the awkward eye contact with strangers anymore. But I had no choice. My job was too far to walk, and I wasn't looking for another job just yet. Every morning I stood at the same stop and waited. The bus often arrived late, and it was never a smooth ride. There were bumps, strong odors, and people shouting on their phones. Still, I tried to keep my head down and get through it. After a week or two, I noticed something strange. Even when the bus got crowded, there was a particular seat near the back that no one chose. People filled all the other seats first. Sometimes the driver had to tell people to move back so more riders could fit. But that seat, on the left side by the window, stayed empty. I remember standing in the aisle, squeezed between a group of teenagers on one side and a sleeping older guy on the other, and that empty seat just sat there. I thought it was weird, but figured maybe the cushion was torn or dirty. The next day, I paid more attention. I got on earlier than usual, so the bus wasn't that full. The seats in front started to fill up, and people moved further back. But as more people boarded at later stops, that one seat remained untouched. A couple of folks glanced at it. One woman even stepped closer, but she walked right past it and settled in another seat, which forced someone else to stand. I stared at the seat. It looked clean enough, no gum or spilled coffee. The cushion had a slight tear on one corner, but I saw worse damage on other seats that people still used. I started feeling curious. A few days went by, and that seat stayed empty every single time. Sometimes I'd see new riders approach it, but they paused and moved on. Older riders didn't even seem to look at it. It was like they already knew something. One morning, I asked a coworker who also took that bus if he noticed. He just shrugged. "I never paid attention," he said. "Probably just a coincidence." I tried to press him, but he didn't seem interested. He put on his headphones and shut me out. It bugged me. I wasn't chasing some dramatic mystery, but it felt off. Then came the day I decided to sit there. It was a Wednesday. I remember that because I was late for a team meeting. I got on the bus, found it crowded as usual, and noticed the seat was empty again. I stood in the aisle at first, feeling the sway of the bus as it pulled away from the curb. My bag kept bumping against someone's knee. After the second stop, more people piled in, and I was pushed even further back. I glanced around and saw that seat was still open. I hesitated. I felt a weird knot in my stomach, but I told myself I was being childish. It was just a bus seat. So I sat down. The moment I planted myself on that seat, the guy in front of me turned around. He was a young man in a gray hoodie. He looked at me, made a quick face, then stood up and moved 2 rows ahead. He didn't speak. He didn't even make a noise. He just left. My skin prickled. I could feel my heart rate spike. For a second, I thought maybe I smelled bad. I tried to sniff myself discreetly, but didn't notice anything unusual. Then I realized other people were staring too. Not everyone, but enough that I felt singled out. An older lady 2 seats down gave me a once-over. A man across the aisle looked straight at me, then looked away like he didn't want to get caught. I rested my arms on my knees and stared at the floor. It felt tense. My mouth got dry. Nobody said anything, but the atmosphere felt thick. I could almost hear my own breathing. The bus was moving, but I felt trapped. My eyes darted around. I noticed a few heads turned in my direction. Nobody looked friendly. My palms felt sweaty. I couldn't figure out what was happening. I thought about staying there just to prove something to myself. But as we reached the next stop, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and stepped into the aisle. The relief was immediate. I wasn't pinned down by those stares anymore. Once I moved to a different seat, people stopped looking at me. At least, that's how it seemed. The man who had been glaring at me through the reflection in the window went back to playing on his phone. The older lady shifted her gaze to the front of the bus. It was like I had stopped mattering the instant I left that seat. My hands were still shaking. I had an uneasy feeling in my stomach, like I'd done something wrong. I spent the rest of the ride trying to calm down. I arrived at work feeling drained. I tried to focus on my job, but my mind kept drifting back to that weird moment. I took the same bus home that evening. I thought about checking that seat again, but the bus was packed and I ended up near the front. I couldn't see the back corner from there. As I stepped out at my stop, I glanced over my shoulder. Sure enough, that seat was empty, even though a bunch of people were standing. A guy was leaning against the pole by the back door, rubbing his tired eyes, but he didn't even glance at it. Over the next few days, I kept paying attention. The seat was always empty. No one sat there at all except for a couple of times when someone who was new to the route hopped on. But almost immediately, something weird happened. In one instance, I saw a man sit there, but the woman next to him got up and moved away. Then the man himself stood up a minute later and walked to the front, leaving the seat empty again. No words, no confrontation, just a quiet, tense shift. Another time, a guy in a business suit started to sit there, but he changed his mind halfway through. He put one knee on the seat, paused, then stood back up and moved across the aisle. I couldn't let this go. It was too strange. I even tried to bring it up with the bus driver one afternoon when we were stuck in traffic. I said something like, "Hey, did you notice people avoid that seat back there?" The driver gave me a quick look in the mirror and shrugged. He mumbled something about how he doesn't pay attention to small stuff. He told me to stand clear of the doors, and that was it. I felt a little silly for asking. My coworker kept shrugging it off too. He said, "You're probably imagining things," or "maybe the seat is uncomfortable." But he never sat there, and he never admitted noticing anything. No one else wanted to talk about it. I started feeling like I was the only one who cared. I felt this creeping paranoia, wondering if there was some story behind that seat. Maybe someone had an accident there, or maybe there was some rumor going around. But nobody told me anything. It was like a silent agreement among the regular riders. Don't mention that seat and don't sit there. I tried sitting there again 2 weeks later, just to see if anything had changed. This time I did it during a less crowded ride. It was mid-afternoon on a Thursday and the bus was only half full. I walked down the aisle and saw the seat empty. I felt my pulse quicken as I approached. My hands were clammy. My gut told me not to do it, but I made myself slide in anyway. The second I sat down, the guy across the aisle looked up from his phone. He didn't say a word, but he seemed uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat and glanced toward the front. A person 3 rows ahead leaned sideways to look back. I felt a chill on my neck. The seat itself felt normal. The cushion was firm. The window was a bit grimy, but so were all the windows. Yet my heart was pounding like I was doing something wrong. No one moved seats this time, but the tension was there. I felt like I was being watched. I tried to stare out the window, but my reflection spooked me. My face looked pale. My eyes were darting. I listened to the hum of the bus engine, the whoosh of passing cars, and the faint music from someone's headphones. I stayed there for maybe 10 minutes. Then I stood up and moved forward. As soon as I was gone, everything felt normal again. After that, I gave up on trying to sit in that seat. I didn't want to deal with those stares or that weird vibe anymore. Still, I couldn't stop wondering about it. I considered asking random passengers, but I didn't want to come off as a nutcase. People avoid small talk on buses as it is. Bringing up a creepy seat with strangers didn't seem like a good move. I also thought about checking with transit officials or looking online. But what would I even search for? Empty bus seat that everyone avoids for no reason? It sounded ridiculous. On a couple of occasions, I saw brand new riders sit there without hesitation. They were people I'd never seen before. The reaction was the same, though. Those around them would shift away or look uncomfortable. Sometimes the new rider would stay there the whole trip, looking confused by the tension, but no one ever said anything. Other times, they would get up midway. Then someone else would take a quick peek, but nobody regular ever sat there. It felt like an unspoken rule. I tried to watch if there was any physical reason. I checked for lumps in the seat, weird stains or broken springs. It looked fine. The back of the seat was worn, but so were many others on that bus. The overhead light worked normally. There was nothing special about the window either, aside from smudges. There wasn't a smell. I pressed my hand on the cushion, felt around the edges. Nothing. One day I sat near the seat on the opposite side of the aisle to observe. I saw an older man step onto the bus, pay his fare, and shuffle down the aisle. He stopped in front of that empty seat. I watched him stare at it. Then he glanced at the people around him. He seemed hesitant. Finally, he moved on and squeezed into a seat further down, next to a guy who looked annoyed. My arms broke out in goosebumps. There was this sense of isolation around that seat, like it had a bubble around it. I never found out the reason. Maybe there was some local story about it from years ago. Maybe someone had a traumatic experience in that spot. Maybe it was all in people's heads. Nobody ever explained it to me. When I tried to bring it up, people brushed me off or changed the subject. I got tired of pushing. I decided to let it be and just avoid the seat myself. Life kept moving on. I had bills to pay, errands to run, and a job that wore me out. I didn't have the energy to keep obsessing over a chair on a bus. But I never forgot the uncomfortable feeling when I sat there. That tightness in my chest, the prickling on my skin, the stiffness in my shoulders. There was a silent understanding among the regulars, or at least it seemed that way. They didn't want to talk about it, but they also didn't want to sit there. It was easier to leave it alone than to dig for answers. In the months that followed, I'd watch new people come and go. Some would sit there, then sense the weirdness. Others would avoid it without realizing why. It became part of the daily routine. Crowd files in, seats fill up, one seat remains empty. Now and then someone clueless takes it, and the same pattern happens. I've even seen that seat open up when there's no other place to sit, and people would rather stand in the aisle. It's realistic because it doesn't involve ghosts or big confrontations. It's just a small, consistent oddity that most people don't question. There's no drama beyond the immediate discomfort. No big explanation. In reality, things like this happen. People create unspoken rules or superstitions. Maybe it started with one strange incident, or maybe it's pure group psychology. But it feels real and it affects you if you notice it. That's what happened to me. Even now, whenever I ride that bus route, I see that seat sitting empty at the back on the left side. My coworker still shrugs when I bring it up. The driver never says a word. Other riders shift around it like water flowing around a rock. It just sits there, an ordinary seat with a small tear in the cushion and no official story behind it. And that's it. That's the entire mystery. I guess I learned that sometimes you don't get answers. Sometimes life moves on, and you either ignore the strange seat or let it drive you crazy. I'm not letting it drive me crazy anymore. I just don't sit there. Let me get straight to the point. I was driving alone on a rural highway late one night, and I saw a man standing on the side of the road who made my skin crawl. Even now, I remember the feeling in my stomach. I want to lay out exactly what happened, and you can decide for yourself if it was just bad timing or something else. I'm just going to tell it like it was, without any fluff or fancy descriptions. It still makes my pulse speed up when I think about it. I had been out of town for a work trip. The drive back took longer than I expected because one of my meetings ran late. By the time I left the client's office, the sun was already down. I filled my gas tank before getting on the highway, then settled in for a couple of hours on the road. At first, it was the usual routine. Headlights on, radio at a comfortable volume, my eyes scanning the darkness around me. I remember feeling a little restless, tapping my thumbs on the steering wheel every now and then. The weather was cool, so I cracked the window to keep fresh air circulating. That late at night, the highway was almost empty, and I saw only a few cars heading in the opposite direction. After about an hour of driving, I reached a section of road with farmland on both sides. I could see the silhouettes of fields beyond the fences. Most of the farmhouses were dark, and it looked like everyone had gone to sleep. The road had a few bends, but it was mostly straight. My headlights showed me a narrow, winding strip of asphalt, with no overhead lights or any signs of civilization, apart from the occasional mailbox at the end of a long dirt driveway. I felt isolated, but not scared. I'd driven on lonely roads before, and I was used to it. I kept going, focused on the road, checking my speed, making sure I wasn't drifting. After a while, though, I started to sense something off. I can't pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was the emptiness of that stretch. Maybe it was how the moonlight fell on the trees. I just remember feeling edgy. My hands got a bit sweaty on the wheel, and I realized I was gripping it a little too tight. I tried to shake off the tension by rolling my shoulders. I even turned up the radio volume a bit, but the static grew louder than the music. That was unusual because I normally got at least a couple of clear stations. At one point, I slowed down to see if my phone had any reception. I remember turning on the screen and noticing I had 0 bars. That didn't surprise me too much because out in the country, signals can be weak. Still, I felt a small jolt of unease. There's something about losing that connection that makes you feel even more alone. I pressed on. The only light came from my headlights, and they cut through the darkness in a narrow beam. The fields, the fences, and the occasional clusters of trees all flickered past. Then I noticed a figure ahead, on the right side of the road, near a large tree. From a distance, it was just a shape, but I could see that it wasn't moving much. At first, I thought maybe it was a broken-down driver, or a farmhand waiting for a ride. But there wasn't a car nearby, and it was really late for someone to be out there alone. As I got closer, my chest tightened. I let my foot ease off the gas. I leaned forward, squinting, trying to understand what was happening. The figure was a man, standing with one shoulder against the trunk of a tree. He wore baggy clothes that looked dirty or stained. I couldn't see his face yet, but I had the impression he was staring in my direction. Everything about him seemed still. No waving arms, no attempts to get me to stop. I thought maybe he was in trouble, but in shock or disoriented. My gut told me something was wrong, though. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. My grip on the steering wheel got tighter. I slowed down even more, rolling forward at maybe 20 miles an hour. At that point, the man turned his head, following my car with his eyes. The brightness of the headlights caught his features. His skin looked weathered, kind of grimy, like he'd been outside for a long time. The clothes he had on looked like an old jacket and maybe a pair of work pants. They seemed worn and discolored. What really unsettled me was that he didn't move his arms or raise a hand. He just stared directly at me, his expression unreadable. When my car lined up with him, he took one step closer to the road. I remember swallowing hard. The dryness in my mouth was immediate. My heart thumped so loudly I thought he might hear it. I didn't see any sign that he needed help. He didn't raise his thumb to hitch a ride, didn't wave, didn't shout. He just took that one step, never breaking eye contact. I felt trapped by the strangeness of it. My mind raced, asking if I should stop or keep going. I worried that if I stopped, I might regret it. But part of me felt guilty at the idea of ignoring someone who might be in trouble. In the end, my fear outweighed any concern. I pressed gently on the gas, and the car began to move past him. I couldn't tear my eyes away. He was like a statue. Then, as soon as the front of my car was parallel with him, he tilted his head slightly, like he was sizing me up. My chest tightened so much I had trouble inhaling. The entire moment felt thick and heavy, like time had slowed down. Yet everything happened in just a few seconds. I continued forward, and my car passed him completely. I glanced in the rearview mirror right away. My heart was pounding. The headlights illuminated the tree trunk, the grass by the roadside, and a small stretch of fence. The man was gone. That's what made me shudder. One moment he was there. The next moment the spot looked empty. I craned my neck, trying to catch any movement behind me, but I saw nothing except the faint outline of the tree. A wave of goosebumps spread across my arms. I took a few shaky breaths. My mind tried to explain it logically. Maybe he stepped out of sight, or maybe I just missed him in the darkness. But the abruptness of it all, 1 second there, then gone, felt almost impossible. At the same time, I knew there was no proof of anything beyond that strangeness. It didn't mean he vanished, but it sure felt that way. I kept driving, pressing the gas pedal a bit more aggressively than normal. My eyes kept flicking back to the rearview mirror, even though I wasn't sure what I expected to see. My palms were slippery on the steering wheel. I wiped one hand on my pants, switched hands, then did the same with the other. My breathing was fast, and my pulse throbbed in my ears. I forced myself to slow my breathing by counting in my head. The road continued through more fields and patches of trees. I passed a rusted barn, then a cluster of small sheds near a driveway. All of them were dark and quiet. The tension in my chest wouldn't go away. I turned on the cabin light for a second just to feel less alone. After a few seconds, I turned it off again because it made it harder to see outside. I kept thinking about what I'd just seen. The man had been standing there, clothes looking like they'd been dragged through the dirt, and his eyes had felt so intense. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just a drifter or someone who got lost. But why stare like that? Why step forward as though he wanted to stop me but not make a signal for help? I had no answers. About 10 minutes later, I came upon a small gas station. It was closed, but the parking lot had a couple of vending machines. I pulled in, parked under a dull overhead light, and cut the engine. I sat there for a minute, breathing heavily, trying to let the feeling pass. The fluorescent light buzzed, and moths flickered around it. I realized I was hungry, but my nerves were so raw that I didn't have any appetite. I just wanted to calm down. I climbed out of the car, walked over to the vending machine, and got a bottle of water. The air outside felt damp and cool, and I noticed my hands trembling slightly as I twisted the cap. I took a long drink. The water felt good, but my stomach still churned. I looked back at the road, half expecting to see a shadowy figure come into view. Nothing was there. The only sounds were the insects and the low hum of the vending machines. After a few minutes, I got back in my car and started the engine. I took off down the highway again, determined to put more distance between me and that stretch of road. I tried to find a radio station with some talk program or music, anything to keep my mind focused on normal stuff. The static was strong, but eventually I found a weak signal carrying some old rock songs. The rest of the drive was tense, but I didn't see anyone else on the roadside. Every time I rounded a bend, I caught myself bracing for a figure to appear. It didn't happen, though. Eventually, the farmland gave way to a few scattered houses and a small intersection with a blinking traffic light. When I reached that intersection, I felt a rush of relief. My body loosened up a bit, and I realized how stiff my shoulders had been. I made it home around midnight. The first thing I did was lock my car and check the windows in my house. I'm not usually so paranoid, but that night, I felt the need to be sure. Once inside, I kicked off my shoes, dropped my luggage, and headed straight to the bathroom to wash my face. The cold water on my skin helped me feel more grounded. I caught my own reflection in the mirror, and I saw that I looked rattled. My eyes were wide, my face a little pale. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept picturing the man stepping out toward my car, his eyes steady on me. I'd jerk awake every few hours, my heart racing. The next day I got up early, made some coffee, and tried to put it out of my mind. I figured it was just one of those weird experiences on the road. Maybe I should have called the local sheriff's office to report a suspicious person, but I didn't have a license plate or anything to give them, and he hadn't exactly committed a crime. He was just there, and then he wasn't. In the weeks that followed, I avoided that route at night. If I had to travel for work, I picked a different road, even if it was longer. But eventually, circumstances forced me to drive that stretch again. This time, I left earlier in the afternoon, so I'd still have some daylight when I passed by. The entire drive, I was on edge. My stomach was tight, and my hands wouldn't relax on the wheel. By the time I came near the spot, the sun was dipping behind the horizon, but there was still enough light to see the tree. I slowed down and glanced to the right side of the road. No one was there. The tree looked ordinary. The fence was there, the same farmland beyond it. The place looked empty. Still, my heart pounded. I felt a layer of sweat on my forehead, even though the temperature was mild. My legs tensed and my foot hovered on the gas pedal, prepared to speed up if I caught a glimpse of anything unusual. Nothing happened. I passed the spot, kept my speed, and eventually let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I've gone by that spot several more times since then. I've never seen the man again, but every single time, my pulse quickens, and I feel a cold sensation in my gut. It's not logical, but my mind drags me back to that night. I still picture him standing there, clothes covered in grime, eyes locked on my headlights. I replay the moment when he took that step forward, and I wonder what he intended. If I had pulled over, would he have asked for help, or would it have gone another way? I don't have an answer. All I have is the memory of that strange encounter in the middle of nowhere. It was real, at least to me. I felt the tension in my bones, heard the thump of my heart in my ears. There was nothing supernatural about it. It was just a man, but something about him was off. That's what makes it so unnerving. It was a normal road, a normal night, and yet I still get chills when I think about it. My hands get damp when I remember how he looked at me. People sometimes ask me why I get edgy on rural roads. I don't share this story often, because it sounds like nothing happened. But that's exactly what makes it stick with me. It was just a person standing by a tree at night, yet it made me feel like I was in serious danger. I try not to dwell on it. Still, I keep my guard up whenever I pass through that area. If I see anyone standing on the roadside, I slow down enough to get a better look, but I rarely stop. Maybe that's selfish, but I'd rather not find out the hard way if my instincts were right that night. That's basically it. There's no dramatic ending. I got home safe, and I never discovered who he was or what he wanted. I only know that his eyes seemed to cut right through the darkness and lock on me. The fear I felt was pure and immediate. That feeling hasn't faded. Even now, if I close my eyes and picture that spot on the highway, I can almost feel my heart rate picking up again. Maybe it was just a random guy. Or maybe something else was going on. I'll never really know. But that's why it feels so real, so vivid. There were no flashing lights or otherworldly signs, just a man by the road. That was all it took to shake me up more than I'd like to admit. I never thought a few words on a wall could shake me, but I was wrong. The day I first stepped into that basement studio, I felt certain I'd found a hidden gem. It was quiet down there, with thick walls and floors that blocked out the city noise. I wanted a space to practice and record, and it seemed perfect. Then I found those messages and everything changed. I'm going to walk you through what happened, step by step, the way I remember it. I'm not adding any fancy touches or deep insights. I'll just tell you what I did, what I saw, and how I felt in the moment. I discovered this place through an online ad. It showed a few photos of a cramped but serviceable room with exposed pipes in the ceiling and foam panels on some of the walls. The ad mentioned good acoustics, cheap rent, and no neighbors to complain about noise. I had a small home studio before, but my neighbors always got annoyed if I recorded late. So a basement with actual insulation sounded perfect. I emailed the building manager and we arranged a time to check it out. When I first saw the building, it looked a bit run down. The lobby was plain, with dull tile floors and fluorescent lights. The manager was an older guy wearing a faded polo shirt. He led me to the back of the lobby, then down a flight of concrete stairs. The smell changed at the bottom. It was damp, sort of musty, but not too strong. The hallway had a few doors on the left, all closed, and pipes ran along the ceiling. We stopped at the last door. Inside, it wasn't pretty, but it had enough space for my gear. The foam panels on the wall had small tiers, and a few cables lay in a corner. There was a single overhead light fixture with a flickering fluorescent tube. The manager said I could replace it if I wanted. I tapped my foot on the floor. Solid concrete. Sound wouldn't travel far. This was exactly what I needed. I signed the rental papers a few days later. The price was low, and the manager seemed happy to finally have someone use the studio again. He told me it had been empty for months. That made sense. It wasn't a glamorous spot, and it probably took a specific type of tenant to want a basement studio. I liked the isolation. On my first official day as a renter, I carried my monitors, interface, and a few instruments down the stairs. I also brought cleaning supplies. The walls looked grimy and the floor needed sweeping. I wanted to set things up right away, so I dropped off my gear, then knelt down to clear dust from the corners. I remember hearing my breath echo slightly. It was a small space, but the reverb was noticeable. I liked that. Felt like a real studio environment. I was wiping the wall near the door when I saw the words. They were in thin black marker, off to the side, about knee-high. Have you heard his voice? At first, I thought it was just some leftover graffiti. I squinted at it and noticed the letters were shaky, like someone wrote them in a hurry. It looked more like a question than a random phrase. I shrugged it off. I'd seen weirder stuff in rehearsal spaces. People love writing nonsense on walls. It didn't creep me out yet. It just felt weirdly specific, but I focused on cleaning. After a few hours, I got most of the dust out. I set up my monitors on a sturdy table I'd brought and plugged them in. I placed my mic stand in a corner and laid some cables. I tested everything. The place had decent acoustics, just like the ad said. The overhead light still flickered occasionally. I tried tapping the fixture, but it didn't help. I thought maybe I'd replace it eventually or bring in a lamp. I spent the next few days hauling more instruments. By the end of the week, I had everything. A keyboard, a couple of guitars, a small drum machine, plus some chairs. The environment was quiet except for the soft hum of a ventilation pipe. The caretaker, not the manager but a younger guy in overalls, passed by a couple of times. He was usually mopping the hallway or checking the pipes. He barely spoke, just nodded at me. Then came the night I stayed late to do a test recording. The building was mostly empty after 7 p.m. I got there around 6, set up my mic, and started playing around with some loops. I didn't notice anything odd for about an hour. I recorded a simple guitar piece, then tested some vocal lines. I paused to listen back through my headphones, and that's when I realized how silent the corridor had become. That wasn't unusual, but the silence felt heavy. By around 8:30 p.m., I began wrapping up. I walked toward the wall with the lights, turning them off one by one. The overhead flickered and hummed. I flicked the switch and the room dimmed, leaving a soft glow from the hallway bulb. As I went to unplug my equipment, I noticed something on the floor near my desk. I knelt down. In red marker, the words, "He saw you." They were about the same size as the black writing on the wall. My first reaction was confusion, then a sudden spike of panic. My chest tightened, and my heart pounded. I looked around, but I was alone. I picked up a nearby rag and some spray cleaner, trying to wipe it. The red marker smeared a little, but didn't come off. My hand shook, and I felt this sense of being watched, like I wasn't alone in that basement. I rubbed harder, but the mark wouldn't fully disappear. I grabbed my phone and used its flashlight to scan the rest of the floor. I didn't see any other messages. I checked the corners, under my table, behind my equipment. Nothing else was there. I didn't hear footsteps or voices. The caretaker hadn't come in that entire time, as far as I knew. I felt my pulse racing. I was breathing fast, and my palms were sweaty. I decided to get out of there. I shut off the rest of the lights, locked the door, and hurried up the stairs. I didn't see anyone in the hallway or the lobby. The building seemed deserted. That night, I slept poorly. I tried telling myself it was just some leftover graffiti, but I couldn't shake the thought that it looked fresh, like someone had done it recently. The next morning, I went back earlier than usual. I found the caretaker in the hallway, checking a fuse box. I asked him if anyone else had a key to my studio. He said no. I asked if he'd seen anyone go in or out. He said no. He told me the studio hadn't been rented for months before me, and he never saw visitors around. The caretaker looked puzzled when I mentioned the writing. He just shrugged and said he hadn't seen or heard anything. I tried scrubbing the messages again. The black text on the wall faded slightly, but the words were still visible. The red marker on the floor looked stubborn, like it had stained the concrete. I got down on my knees, used a tougher sponge, but it only blurred the edges of the letters. The shape remained. He saw you. I felt uneasy the entire time. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. My mind started wandering. Who was he? Why would someone write that? For the next few days, I kept busy with my music. I tried to ignore those marks, but they were always in the corner of my eye. Sometimes I moved my equipment so I wouldn't have to look at the writing on the floor. Other times I taped a piece of cardboard over the words on the wall, but I knew they were still there. The caretaker's reassurance didn't do much for me. I kept thinking someone had a key, or someone was slipping in whenever I took a break. One afternoon, I decided to talk to the building manager again. I went upstairs, found him in the small office by the lobby. I told him about the writing. He seemed surprised but calm. He said the last tenant was a musician as well, but that guy left months ago. He never complained or mentioned anything strange. The manager also insisted nobody else had rented the space since. He offered to lend me some paint to cover the graffiti if it bothered me. That was when I realized I was on my own. There was no big explanation, just me and those words. I painted over the writing on the wall with a small can of white paint. It mostly covered the black letters, but I could still see a faint outline if I looked closely. The floor was a bigger problem. I tried painting it too, but the red marker bled through the first coat. I did a second coat, which helped, though a slight shadow of the letters remained if the light hit it at the right angle. My nerves stayed on edge each time I stepped on that spot. At night, the basement felt colder. I started hearing these soft creaks in the pipes. The caretaker told me it was normal, just water running. Still, whenever I heard them, my stomach would twist, and I'd pause whatever I was doing to listen. I'd wait for any sign of a person sneaking around. Sometimes I'd open the door to the hallway just to check. Nobody was there every single time. The messages messed with my head. They were simple, but they fueled my imagination. Have you heard his voice? He saw you. It felt like a warning or a question, but I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't sure if I should worry about some stalker or if it was just random scribbles. I tried focusing on my music, but the tension made it hard to concentrate. My recording sounded lifeless. My mind wasn't in the right place. After a month, I started dreading my visits. That basement smell felt suffocating. I noticed every flicker of the overhead light. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder. Even when the caretaker was around, I felt exposed, like the walls had eyes. I resented this feeling. I'd rented this space to create, not to stress about strangers or cryptic notes. One evening, I decided I'd had enough. I packed up my main equipment, microphones, guitars, a small mixer. I left some cheaper stuff behind, planning to get it later. My hands were trembling as I carried boxes up the stairs. I kept listening for footsteps behind me. My scalp tingled every time I heard the echo of my own steps. When I reached the lobby, I felt relief wash over me. The next morning, I canceled the rental. I told the building manager I had found another location that fit my schedule better. He didn't push. He just said he understood and that he'd keep my deposit if I left before the contract ended. I accepted that. I didn't want to argue. I wanted to get out of there. I went back one last time to collect my remaining gear. The caretaker saw me in the hallway and asked if something was wrong. I said I just needed a different space with more ventilation. He nodded, like he'd heard that excuse 100 times. I wondered if he suspected the real reason. But I didn't want to explain about the messages again. I wanted to be done. Walking into the studio, I saw the faint marks on the wall where I'd painted. They were almost impossible to read now. The spot on the floor was covered by an old rug I had laid down. I folded the rug and packed it up. Underneath, I glimpsed the faint red letters one more time. It made my heart pound again. I hurried. When I carried the last box out, I gave a final glance at the empty room. The overhead light flickered, a tiny buzz filling the silence. The smell of musty concrete lingered. My face felt hot, and I could sense my pulse in my neck. I locked the door behind me. I walked away, feeling a wave of relief. No more scrawled words, no more weird chills, no more musty basement. I told myself it was all just random vandalism from a previous tenant, probably some stressed-out musician who wrote nonsense on the walls. That explanation makes sense. The manager said nobody else was in there, so maybe it was old. Could have been overlooked until I noticed it. The fear came from not knowing. That's it. But still, every time I recall that red phrase, I feel a knot in my stomach. He saw you. I can't explain why it bothered me so much, but it did. I never went back to that building. I don't have any ghost stories or proof of intruders. It could have just been leftover graffiti. Yet I remember the feeling of panic, the sweaty palms, the way my eyes darted to every shadow. It felt real to me, and that was enough to make me leave. That's my story. No dramatic ending, no revelations. Just a basement studio, strange words on a wall, and me walking away before anything worse happened. Some people might laugh at that, but I don't care. I still don't want to see those words again. I still remember that night with absolute clarity. We were on a back road heading home from a barbecue. It was close to midnight, and there were no streetlights around. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. My heart was still pounding from the fun and noise at the party, but there was something else too. Something I couldn't explain. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The asphalt looked endless, and I was gripping the wheel a little harder than usual. My name is Mark. I was driving my old sedan, a model from the late 90s. It had some mileage on it, but it never gave me serious problems. I'd replaced the battery recently, and the alternator was checked a few months before. I trusted that car. It had carried me through college and a few road trips without many issues. That night, though, it would show a side I'd never seen. My two friends, Alex and John, were with me. Alex rode in the front passenger seat. John was in the back. The three of us had spent the day at a friend's place for a barbecue. We ate too much and probably drank more than we should have, but I felt stable enough to drive. I wasn't tipsy. I was just tired. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, and it read 11:48 p.m. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I could smell the lingering smoke from the barbecue on my clothes. The windows were rolled up, and the cabin felt a little stuffy. I turned on the AC, but it only blew moderately cool air. After a while, Alex started talking. He made a joke about one of our acquaintances, a guy we all knew from town. This acquaintance is known for being really devoted to his religion. He always carries a small religious book in his pocket, and he doesn't drink or party. Alex said something like, "I bet he'd be quoting verses at us if he'd been there tonight." I laughed a little. John chuckled from the back seat. We weren't being mean, just light teasing, but then Alex pushed it further. He started mocking that friend's beliefs, imitating his serious tone. We all laughed, but deep down I felt a little uneasy. I didn't say anything, though. Right at that moment, probably halfway through Alex's joke, something happened with the car's lights. The dome light overhead flickered, even though it wasn't turned on. It was set to door, and the doors were closed. The dashboard lights blinked, and the headlights seemed to dim for a second. The engine stumbled like it missed a beat. My steering wheel got heavier, and I had a brief surge of panic. I felt my chest tighten. "Whoa," I said. "Did you guys see that?" Alex turned toward me, eyes wide. John leaned forward in the back seat. "Yeah," John said. The lights flickered. "Are you sure this piece of junk is okay?" He was joking, but his voice sounded a bit tense. I tried to brush it off, even though my heart was pounding. I told them the car was fine and that it was probably just an electrical hiccup. We kept going. The road stretched on. There were trees on both sides and occasionally an old wooden fence. No houses, no rest stops, nothing. The only sign of life was the occasional bug smacking against the windshield. We were all silent for a while. I was trying to listen to the engine for any weird sound. I heard a low hum from the tires on the pavement. The AC was still blowing, not too strong, but enough to keep the windows from fogging. Then John picked up where Alex had left off. He started laughing about that same acquaintance, calling him Mr. Holy. He said he'd probably faint if he saw all the beer we had. I snorted at that. I guess I was in that post-buzz mood where everything felt funnier than it should. John made another remark. Something about how our friend believed in signs and omens. We found that funny, in a silly way. And right on cue, as soon as John said the word omen, the dashboard lights blinked again. This time the radio display went black for a second. The AC fan weakened. The headlights dimmed so much that the road ahead almost disappeared. It lasted maybe a second, but it felt like a lot longer. My stomach lurched. My foot twitched on the gas pedal. I remember feeling a cold sensation run up the back of my neck. Alex gripped the armrest, and John stopped talking. I said, "This is too weird." My voice cracked. I tried to sound calm, but I was definitely rattled. Part of me thought we should pull over, but there was nowhere safe to stop. No shoulder, no lights, not even a gas station in sight. The road was narrow and the trees were close on both sides. I decided to keep driving until we found a better spot. We went quiet again. We could hear the steady hum of the engine. I noticed every little sound. The slight squeak whenever I pressed the accelerator. The clicking noise from the AC vents. My heart was beating faster than normal. I kept thinking about that second flicker. It hadn't been a small glitch. It felt like the entire electrical system had dipped. But then the car kept running. I glanced at Alex. He was staring out the window, tapping his foot. John was leaning back, arms crossed. No one said anything. We must have gone on like that for 10 minutes. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was stuck on those flickers. I wondered if I'd have to call for a tow truck. The idea of being stranded in the middle of nowhere that close to midnight made me even more anxious. Eventually, Alex broke the silence. He said, "This is messed up. It happened both times we made those jokes." I shrugged. I tried to say something like, "It's just a coincidence," but I didn't sound convincing. John mumbled from the back, "Yeah, man, that is odd." He sounded a little shaky, like he was trying to act tough but couldn't hide the nerves. Alex pushed it again. He said something sarcastic about God punishing us. He laughed nervously. I think he was trying to lighten the mood, but his tone sounded forced. The moment he finished his sentence, the car had the worst flicker yet. The headlights dimmed so much I thought we had lost them. The engine sputtered like it was going to stall. The speedometer needle dropped for a second. The entire cabin went dark except for a faint glow from the hazard light button. I gripped the wheel with both hands. My arms felt tight. My eyes were wide, searching the darkness for any sign of the road. In my head, I shouted at the car, "Don't die now!" My heart pounded against my ribcage and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. It was hot in the car, even though the AC was on. Alex cursed under his breath and John yelled, "What the hell?" After a second or two, everything came back. The dashboard lit up, the engine caught its rhythm again, and the headlights returned to normal. I could feel my breath coming in short bursts. I tried to force myself to calm down. I reached for a bottle of water that was in the cup holder, took a long swig, and my hand was trembling. "That's it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "No more jokes about that stuff." Alex and John were quiet. I think we all agreed without saying it out loud. The car was obviously having some sort of electrical meltdown, but the timing was too perfect. Each time we said something about our friends' beliefs or joked around like that, the car responded. It didn't make sense to me. Part of me wanted to think it was just a short circuit, but another part of me felt uneasy. We drove on. Nobody said a word about our friend or religion or anything like that. After a few minutes, I started noticing that the lights were stable again. The engine sounded smooth, the dashboard was bright, and nothing was flickering. The tension in my neck eased a bit. I relaxed my shoulders and took a deep breath. I kept thinking, maybe it's fixed now. Maybe it was just a loose wire or something that settled. 10 more minutes passed without any issues. We saw a small sign pointing toward the main highway. Finally, we reached an intersection with a few lights. That felt like a relief. We turned onto the main road and I felt safer. There were a couple of other cars around and the streetlights made everything feel normal again. I relaxed, and I think Alex and John did too. We started talking about random stuff, but we avoided the topic of religion or our acquaintance. We stuck to safe subjects like sports and how we missed the last big game. When we arrived in town, I dropped John off first. He lived near a quiet block with old houses. I waited until he got in his front door, then I drove Alex to his place. On the way to Alex's house, we barely spoke. I think we were both replaying the drive in our minds. I remember looking at him and seeing the tension in his jaw. He offered me money for gas and I waved it off, telling him not to worry. I was still rattled. After I dropped him off, I went home, parked my car, and sat there for a minute before going inside. I was sweaty, and my heart was still beating hard. I locked the doors, feeling unsure. The next morning, I got up early. I felt like I needed to figure out what happened. I took my car to a local mechanic, a guy named Rick I've known for years. I explained the symptoms: the dashboard lights flickering, the headlights dimming, the engine nearly stalling. I told him the battery and alternator were fairly new. He popped the hood and checked the cables, tested the electrical system, ran a diagnostic. After an hour, he said he couldn't find any issues. Everything looked fine. No error codes, no loose wires, no weird voltage drops. He shrugged and said, "Could have been a one-time glitch." That answer didn't satisfy me, but I had to accept it. I drove the car around town that day, trying to make it flicker again. I turned on all the lights, blasted the AC, played music loud. Nothing happened. It ran perfectly. I called Alex and John later. They both asked if I'd found any problem. I told them no. We ended up joking about it, but we avoided talking about the religious angle. It just felt strange to bring it up, like we didn't want to tempt fate again. To this day, the car hasn't repeated that exact malfunction. It's been years, and I still can't explain it. I've changed a few parts since then. The spark plugs, a belt, some filters, but never fixed any wiring problem because no one ever found one. Whenever I mention it to people, they say it sounds like an electrical short or maybe a problem with the ignition system, but nobody can explain why it lined up with our jokes the way it did. Sometimes, late at night, I replay it in my head. We were on that dark road, far from anyone, talking about something we shouldn't have. Every time we pushed that line, the lights cut out. Then when we stopped, the car ran perfectly. It could have been a weird coincidence or a random electrical glitch triggered by vibrations whenever we spoke too loud. But it was consistent enough to freak us out. Why is it realistic? Because every part of it could be a mechanical issue. Cars have odd problems sometimes. Wiring can fail. Connections can be loose. It might have been a small short that got jostled when we talked or moved around in our seats. There was no ghost, no shadowy figure, no final explosion. Nobody died. But that coincidence made it feel like something wanted us to stop talking. Even after all these years, I still don't have a better explanation. It could have been the wiring. It could have been something else. All I know is that it happened, and I don't want to repeat that experiment. I've learned to be careful with what I say, especially on lonely roads late at night. I got home that night feeling like a dead battery. I had worked a long shift, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of sleep. I pushed open the door to my tiny apartment and tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter. The place was cramped, just a bedroom and a small living area attached to a kitchenette, plus a bathroom in the corner. I liked it because it was cheap and close to my job, and I didn't have to share it with anyone. Usually, I found the quiet relaxing. That night, though, something felt off the second I walked in. I locked the front door out of habit. The sound of the latch clicking gave me a little comfort, and I told myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. The living area was the size of a walk-in closet. I had a small couch against one wall, a TV across from it, and barely enough space for a coffee table. The kitchenette was a couple of cabinets, a stove, and a refrigerator, all aligned against the far wall. The place smelled stale, like I needed to open a window, but I was too tired to care. My bedroom was on the right side, separated by a thin door that I usually kept open. The bathroom was a tiny space on the other side, with a narrow stall shower, a toilet, and a small sink. Right then, I tossed my jacket onto the couch, kicked off my shoes, and trudged straight into the bathroom. I was too exhausted to do anything else. I turned the shower on, adjusted the temperature until it was as hot as I could stand, and stepped under the water. The steam clouded my view, and for a second, I closed my eyes. The dull ache in my shoulders started to fade. I let the water pound on my back and tried to think about nothing. No noise, no stress, no problems. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Clear as day. I heard a creak in the next room, like someone stepping across my bedroom floor. My eyes snapped open and I stared at the shower tiles. My first thought was that maybe the upstairs neighbor was walking around, but the footsteps sounded too close. It felt like they were only a few feet away, right in my bedroom. I reached for the faucet and turned the water off, leaving myself in total silence. Drips of water fell from my hair to the shower floor. I listened, trying not to make a sound. Then I heard another soft creak, like weight on an old floorboard. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry and my heart kicked into a higher gear. I grabbed my towel, wrapped it around my waist, and took a step toward the bathroom door. I hesitated. My hands were shaking, and I realized I was standing there in a tiny bathroom with only a locked wooden door between me and whoever might be out there. I flipped the lock on the bathroom door, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded weak. I cleared my throat and tried again, a little louder. "Is someone there?" Silence. I pressed my ear against the door, but all I could hear was my own breathing. My hair dripped water onto the floor. After maybe half a minute, I decided to open the door. I wasn't armed and I didn't even have pants on, but I figured if there was a person inside, better to face it right away. The waiting was worse for my nerves. I turned the lock, twisted the knob, and opened the door a crack. I peeked into my bedroom. My lamp was off and the room was dim except for the faint glow coming from the hallway light. I stuck my head out and scanned the room. My bed was unmade, the covers in a heap. My closet door was partly open, but that was normal because it never latched right. Everything looked the same as when I'd left that morning. I stepped into the bedroom, my footsteps squishing against the carpet because my feet were still wet. I checked the closet first, yanking the door open. Nothing inside but my wrinkled shirts and old shoes. Then I crept to the far corner, between the bed and the wall, even though there was barely enough space for a person to hide. Empty. I ducked down to look under the bed. Nothing but a few cardboard boxes and some dust. I tried to ignore the goosebumps on my arms. I kept reminding myself I lived alone. No one else had a key. I walked into the living area, my wet feet leaving tracks on the hardwood. My couch was empty. The tiny kitchen was exactly as I had left it, though the fridge made its usual humming noise. I checked the door to the apartment, still locked from the inside. I felt my shoulders relax a bit. I told myself I must have imagined it. Or maybe it was the pipes expanding. Old buildings do that all the time, especially when the weather changes. The problem was that I knew the sound of those pipes. They made a certain clang or a pop, not slow, deliberate footsteps. But I tried to brush it off. I dried myself off in the bedroom, got dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, and went back to the kitchen to warm up a can of soup. I was still feeling tense, but I forced myself to focus on the task. I turned on the stove, poured the soup into a small pot, and stared at it while it heated. The quiet in the apartment was heavier than usual. I turned on the TV in the living area, just loud enough to mask the silence. Some random late-night show flashed across the screen. I glanced at it but couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to those footsteps. Once my soup was done, I slurped it down, standing at the counter. I didn't feel like sitting, I couldn't settle. I kept looking over my shoulder toward the bedroom. It was dark in there. The only light was the dull glow from the living area lamp that reached halfway through the doorway. I thought about turning on the bedroom lamp, but I felt kind of silly. If I was dealing with an overactive imagination, it made no sense to walk around turning on every light. Still, I couldn't shake the anxiety. After I washed my bowl, I checked the apartment one more time. I looked in the bathroom, peeked behind the shower curtain, checked under the sink even though no one could fit in there. I looked under the couch. I glanced through the tiny coat closet near the front door. Nothing. I felt a little better. I locked the door from the inside again, then headed to bed. It was only about 10:30 p.m., but I was already beyond tired. My body was worn out from work. I turned off the living area lamp, leaving the apartment in darkness except for the faint glow of a streetlight through the bedroom window. I lay in bed, pulled the covers up to my chest, and closed my eyes. For a while, I just listened to the faint sounds outside. Cars in the distance, muffled voices from neighbors, and the occasional honk from the street. Gradually, I started to relax. Then, just as I was half asleep, I heard those footsteps again. They sounded right outside my bedroom door. My eyes flew open and my breathing sped up. There were 2 steps, then a pause, then 2 more steps like someone pacing. My body went cold. I slowly sat up in bed, trying not to make any sudden sounds. The bedroom door was open so I could see the faint outline of the hallway. Nothing moved there. My heart hammered so loud I thought it might echo. The steps sounded heavier this time. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand and turned on the screen to light up the area. I didn't see anything in the doorframe. My hand was shaking so much I almost dropped my phone. I was debating whether to call the police, but what would I say? I hear footsteps, but there's nobody here. They'd come and look around, probably find nothing. I slid out of bed, trying to be as quiet as possible. My bare feet touched the cold floor. I gripped my phone and inched toward the open bedroom door. My knees felt weak. I peeked into the hallway. It was dark, and I could just barely make out the shapes of furniture in the living area. I took a slow, careful step into the hallway. The air felt chilly. I listened, holding my breath. I didn't hear anything except the thumping of my own heart. I flipped on the hallway light. The living area looked empty. The front door was still closed. I crept across the living room, checking every corner. I stood there for a minute, my phone in my hand, scanning the space. Nothing. No one. I realized I was sweating even though the apartment was on the cool side. My face felt flushed and my mouth was dry. I swallowed and tried to calm down. I walked to the door and opened it quickly, expecting to see someone in the hallway outside. No one was there. The corridor was empty, the lights dim. I stuck my head out and looked both ways. Silence. I closed the door again, locked it, and did the stupid routine of checking behind the couch, inside the bathroom, the closet, under the bed. Everything was empty. When I finally crawled back into bed, it was close to midnight. I switched off the bedroom lamp, stared at the ceiling, and waited. My entire body felt tense like a coiled spring. Every time a pipe hissed or the fridge clicked, I flinched. I caught myself breathing fast, so I forced myself to take slow breaths. My head was spinning with thoughts. Did I lock the window? Could someone have snuck in earlier in the day? Was I losing my mind from exhaustion? I lay there for hours, unable to sleep. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake, thinking I heard a creak or a soft thud. It didn't help that the building sometimes made random noises. It was old, and the walls were thin. I was on the second floor, so I could hear the guy above me sometimes. But the footsteps I heard seemed to be in my place, not upstairs. I couldn't explain it. At around 3 in the morning, I got up, put on some slippers, and paced around the apartment. I flipped on the living room light. I turned on the TV and watched the first random show that popped up, some infomercial about kitchen gadgets. I stared at it without really taking it in. I just needed the distraction. Every so often, I'd mute the TV and listen. Nothing. Then I'd unmute it. After a while, my eyes started to burn from fatigue. By 4, I was so tired that my head kept drooping forward. I decided to try sleeping on the couch. I grabbed a thin blanket from the bed, then lay down on the couch, leaving the living room lamp on. I faced the doorway to the bedroom, keeping it in my line of sight. The hallway was still illuminated, so if anything moved in there, I hoped I'd see it. I shut my eyes and tried to relax. My back started to ache from the couch, but I was too worn out to care. I might have dozed off for 20 minutes or so, but around 4:30, I heard what sounded like a soft step in the bedroom again. My eyes snapped open. The TV was still on with the volume low. The hallway light cast a faint glow on the bedroom door. I didn't see any movement, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. My eyes began to tear up from stress. My heart thudded inside my chest. I stayed completely still on the couch, gripping the blanket with one hand, my phone with the other. I lay there, not moving, for at least 10 minutes. No more sounds. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to stand and check the bedroom again. It was exactly as before, empty. The covers were messy on the bed, and I could smell my own sweat on the pillows. I scanned every corner. I shook out the curtains. I opened the closet and practically stuck my head inside. Nothing. I spent the rest of the night on the couch with the TV on and the lights on. I didn't hear any more footsteps, or if I did, maybe I tuned them out. By morning, I was a wreck. My eyes were bloodshot, and my neck felt stiff. I paced around, checking everything again, but it was all normal. No signs of a break-in, no random items moved, no footprints on the floor, just my own footprints from earlier. It was one of those experiences that made my mind go in circles. Maybe it was the pipes, or maybe the upstairs neighbor was walking around in a pattern that tricked my ears. Maybe the floors were expanding with the temperature changes. There was no proof of anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those footsteps were in my bedroom, not upstairs. I had no reason to believe in anything supernatural, but I couldn't explain it either. That's why it felt real. I was there, I heard it, and I couldn't find any other explanation. I had no visitors that night and no roommates. Yet I heard those steps more than once. In the end, I chalked it up to building noises or some coincidence. But I'll never forget how my heart pounded when I heard someone walking in my bedroom. I've had bad nights of sleep before, but that night was in a league of its own. It felt like I was living in someone else's space, or they were living in mine, and I just couldn't see them. Even now, I still think about it sometimes, especially when I come home late and the apartment is dark and quiet. I guess you never really know all the sounds an old building can make. Or maybe you do, and you try to ignore them. But that night, there was no ignoring anything. It was there just a few feet away, and it left me wide awake until the sun came up. I drove into that region expecting a quiet trip and a few eerie photos. I never thought I'd end up alone in the darkness, listening to a whistle that felt like it was wrapped around my bones. I'm an amateur photographer who chases rumors of ghosts and odd events in my spare time. Usually I find drafty old houses or odd lights. This time was different. The land was empty, the sky was huge, and the air felt like it was holding its breath. That first night, when I heard the whistle outside my tent, I realized I was somewhere that didn't follow normal rules. I arrived in the afternoon on a dusty road that seemed to stretch on forever. Large fields, pale green and dotted with small rocks, spread out on both sides. There were no neighbors, no farms, no animals, just wind through the tall grass. The only signs of life I noticed were a few brown shrubs and maybe a hawk or two circling overhead. The sun sat high and the heat came off the earth in waves. I felt sweat gathering on my neck even with the car window down. I kept driving, looking for a good spot to set up camp. My goal was simple. I wanted to photograph any sign of the rumored spirit that was said to whistle at night. Locals in the closest town had warned me. They said the whistle drew people away from safety, or sometimes marked them, but they didn't have details. They just shrugged and shook their heads when I pressed for more information. They told me no one ever stayed out there for too long. I thought it sounded like an old story repeated for a tourist's benefit, so I tried to act casual about it. Inside, I was excited. I found a small clearing near a group of weathered boulders. Those rocks looked like they had been there forever, shaped by harsh winds that never seemed to stop. I parked my car close to them and pitched my tent in the shade. The wind picked up a bit, making the tall grass roll like a slow wave. The car radio wouldn't tune to any stations. I tried my phone, but there was no signal. I decided to accept the isolation. The first day passed calmly. I walked around with my camera, taking pictures of the landscape. Nothing unusual happened. The sun was bright and the heat made the horizon shimmer. I looked for signs of footprints or older campsites, but I saw only scattered rocks, some broken branches, and endless grass. By late afternoon, the wind started to cool. I took out a small camp stove and heated some canned soup. I watched the sun sink behind the hills. The colors in the sky looked clear and sharp with streaks of orange and red. I turned on a flashlight and settled inside my tent, ready to wait. My camera was loaded with fresh batteries and I had an audio recorder just in case. The night started quietly. I heard crickets chirping, felt the wind tug at the tent, and occasionally heard the sound of dried grass rubbing against itself. Around midnight, I caught it for the first time. A faint whistle. I got up immediately, thinking maybe it was just the wind squeezing through the rocks. It had a steady rhythm, though, and it rose and fell like a simple tune. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and stepped out. The moon lit up the field, so I didn't need much extra light. I tried to pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but it echoed across the wide space. I moved around the boulders and scanned the horizon. I saw nothing. Grass, rocks, and a faint line of hills in the distance. The whistle faded, then started up again. It was definitely closer now. My skin tingled. I tried to keep my breathing steady. I lifted my camera and took a few shots, hoping the flash might catch something. I waited. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Then the whistle stopped. There was silence except for my own breathing. After a while, I went back to my tent, feeling uneasy. I decided to record a few notes in my audio recorder. While I spoke, I realized my voice was shaky. My neck felt stiff, and my stomach churned with tension. Eventually, I managed to doze off. The next morning, I woke to a warm beam of sunlight on my face. It felt surreal, like I'd imagined the entire thing. The day was normal again. The sky was clear, and the grass swayed gently. I ate a quick breakfast, then played back my audio recorder. I heard my own voice describing the whistle, but I couldn't actually hear the sound itself. It was missing from the recording. That struck me as odd. Usually, background noises come through, even if faint. I tried to brush off the disappointment and decided to explore further on foot. I walked for about an hour toward the low hills, carrying my camera and some water. The landscape never changed much. It was all grass and stone. The wind touched everything. I kept alert, scanning the horizon for any person or animal. At one point, I spotted a few large birds in the distance, but that was it. Around midday, I took a break and drank water near a cluster of rocks. I noticed some shallow scratches on the stones like old carvings, but they looked natural. The sun was intense, so I headed back to camp. By late afternoon, clouds drifted in. The wind picked up speed, making the tent flaps snap. I could feel the tension in the air like a storm might come. I decided to set up my tripod and see if I could get any shots of the landscape under the approaching clouds. As I focused my camera, my hands shook a little. I realized I was thinking about the previous night's whistle and feeling uneasy about the hours ahead. When darkness fell, I sat on a camp stool outside my tent. I turned off my flashlight and let my eyes adjust to the moonlit plain. My heart beat faster as time crawled by. I was waiting for that whistle. I felt exposed in the open space, but I wanted a clear view of anything that might appear. For a while, nothing happened. The wind rustled through the grass and I heard a few distant creaks from the rocks. Then I noticed a faint tone drifting on the breeze. It was the same whistle, steady, a bit deeper this time. My jaw clenched. I tried to stay calm. I picked up my camera and aimed it in the direction of the sound, but I couldn't see movement. The whistle got louder, and it changed pitch, like it was responding to my presence. I stood up, stepping away from the tent. My body felt rigid, my pulse pounding in my ears. I tried to talk out loud, asking who was there. My voice cracked. The whistle paused, then started again, almost playful. I walked a few steps forward, scanning the horizon. That's when I noticed a shape. It was barely visible, a darker outline against the night. It stood near a small rise, maybe 100 yards away. It looked tall and unmoving. My fingers felt cold, even though the air was still warm. I adjusted the camera lens and snapped a few pictures. My breath caught in my throat when I realized that the figure was wearing a hood. I couldn't see a face. There were no details, just a hooded form, motionless under the moonlight. The whistle floated across the distance, soft but insistent. I wanted to run, but I also wanted to document it. So I tried to move closer, keeping my camera ready. I walked slowly, my boots crunching on dry soil. I kept my flashlight off because I didn't want to startle whatever was out there. The figure didn't move, but the whistle never stopped. I approached until I was maybe 50 yards away, and then the wind shifted. The grass bent in a different direction, and I lost sight of the figure for a second. When I looked again, it was gone. The whistle, however, continued. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I swept my flashlight over the grass and stones. Nothing. I wanted to run back to the tent, but I didn't want to turn my back on that spot. The whistle started to fade, then it picked up again behind me. I spun around, flashlight darting across the field, but there was no one. I felt dizzy. I forced myself to return to my campsite. Once inside the tent, I fumbled for my audio recorder. My mouth was dry and my hands shook. My scalp felt tight and my shoulders ached from tension. I recorded a few words describing what had happened. Then I sat still in the darkness, hugging my knees. The whistle circled the tent for hours, changing in tone. Sometimes it was low, almost mournful. Sometimes it was high-pitched, almost mocking. I barely slept. The next day, everything looked normal again. There was no sign of footprints or disturbed grass. I reviewed my camera's memory card. Most of the shots were just empty fields. But in 3 photos, I saw a faint silhouette at the edge of the frame. It was definitely a person in a hood. No face was visible, just a shape. This sent a chill through me, but it also proved I wasn't imagining things. I spent the rest of the day pacing around the campsite, unsure whether to leave or stay another night. I kept telling myself I'd come here to capture something unusual, and now I had the chance. Still, my gut felt twisted. There was something wrong about this place. That afternoon, I forced myself to explore again. I walked in a wider circle, scanning for footprints or any sign of a trail. I found some flattened patches of grass, but they looked more like places where the wind had pressed it down. Around a few rocks, I saw worn markings. They didn't look like words or symbols, more like random scratches. I took photos of everything I found, though it wasn't much. As evening approached, I boiled some water for coffee and tried to keep my mind focused. I thought about my plan if the whistle came back. I considered turning on all my lights, blasting music from my car, or even honking the horn. But there was an edge of curiosity in me. I wanted to hear the whistle again, as if it might lead me to something. That feeling scared me. It felt like I was being pulled in 2 directions. Night fell, and the moon emerged from behind a thin layer of clouds. The grass glowed under the pale light. The wind was calmer tonight, so I heard every little sound more clearly. My own footsteps were loud on the dirt. Around midnight, the whistle began again, soft at first. I stepped away from the tent, camera in hand, not sure if I'd regret it. I heard my heart thumping. The whistle drew closer, changing tone, almost beckoning me. I walked toward it, feeling my nerves spike with every step. That was when I saw the hooded figure again. This time, it appeared near the boulders on the opposite side of my camp. It was a dark shape that blended with the shadows. The whistle came from its direction, but the figure itself wasn't moving its arms or head. It stood still. I raised my camera and took several photos, the flash lighting up the rocks. My eyes struggled to adjust in the afterglow, and for a moment I lost sight of the figure. Then I spotted it again on the far side of the boulders. I was certain it had changed position without making a sound. My stomach felt hollow. My throat was tight. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The whistle droned on, echoing in my skull. I walked closer, a few steps at a time. My body felt tense, my legs stiff. When I reached the spot, no one was there. I spun around, scanning the field. That's when I realized the whistle was now behind me. I turned again, panting. The figure stood on the horizon, outlined by moonlight, just a silhouette in a hood looking in my direction. I took one more photo, but the flash was useless at that range. I lowered my camera and stared at it. The whistle still filled the air. Then it stopped. The silence felt heavy. I waited for something else, but it stayed quiet. A few seconds later, a steady breeze returned, swaying the grass. The figure stayed in place as if waiting. I didn't know whether to approach or retreat. My head buzzed with adrenaline, my ears pounded. I was afraid, but also strangely drawn to it. After several moments, I forced myself to back away. I didn't turn my back on it until I was near the tent. Inside the tent, I zipped the flap and sat in the dark for a long time, trembling. I couldn't sleep. The whistle didn't come back for the rest of the night, but I felt its presence like an invisible thread between me and that figure on the horizon. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I needed to leave. I had enough photos, and I didn't want to tempt that force any longer. I packed my gear as fast as I could. The day was bright and hot, and I felt sweat rolling down my back. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a hooded shape standing in the daylight. But nothing appeared. I tossed my tent into the trunk and slammed it shut. My hand still shook as I started the car. I drove away, constantly checking the rearview mirror. The field stretched out behind me, empty and silent in the sun. I felt relief as I got closer to the main road. Even now, recalling those nights makes my skin crawl. The whistle felt alive, like it was searching for me. I can't say if it wanted to harm me or draw me into something beyond my understanding. I only know that I heard it and I saw that hooded figure more than once. I have the photos to prove it, although they're blurry and barely show a silhouette. But it's enough for me to remember how it felt out there, alone in those vast fields with a sound that wrapped around me like a warning or a lure. I still don't sleep well sometimes. I wake up thinking I hear a distant whistle. I check the darkness around me, half expecting to see that figure on my horizon. Maybe one day I'll go back. But for now, I stay away from that region. I don't want to be chosen for anything else. I just want my nights to be quiet, without that sound chasing me through the dark.